14, 15, 16, 17 games. To me, he's clearing this number pretty comfortably. You look at the situation in Cincinnati, they've really bolstered the offense. They've got, of course, Burrow at quarterback. They've got now Chase and Higgins and Boyd on the outside. A lot of weapons to cover. I feel like Mixon is the lost guy, and this is a guy that I really do believe in the talent, and it seems like everything, obviously he had a very, very bad situation in college and whatnot, but he's stayed out of trouble for the most part in the NFL. And if he can just stay healthy, I think we're really primed to see a big year for him. Now, I worry a little about Cincinnati's offensive line. I'm not going to bring Penny Sewell into this conversation, but I do wish they bolstered that front for him because he does have some trouble just having holes for him. But if the volume is there in terms of the carries, and the volume is there in terms of the games played, this is a guy, even though he does catch the ball pretty well, I still think on the ground specifically, he's going to cross over 1,000 yards this year. So at minus 130, I'm very comfortable laying that juice and pushing Mixon over that number this year.
Yeah, so am I. The two prior seasons before he played just 6 games last year, over 1,100 yards rushing. That's, of course, in a 16-game season. He's one of the most efficient backs on a forced missed tackle basis. So I like Mixon a lot there, too. And we didn't even mention Giovanni Bernard is gone. He's mainly the third down back, but he did siphon off some carries.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, if they have, and I think Cincinnati's going to be okay, but they can stay in games. I mean, I think Perine's fine, and I'm sure he'll siphon some, but this is Joe Mixon's backfield. He is going to get the volume. He's going to get the work. And when we see him out there, I think he's going to be pretty effective. So that's where I lean. You're with Odell. I'm with Mixon. Where do you go for your second player prop here?
My second player prop, I'm going to go with an under, and this is probably an unpopular one. It's the rushing leader last year, the 2,000-yard club, Derrick Henry. Right now, his prop is not anywhere near 2,000 yards. It's actually sitting at 1,555, which is still a little bit rich for my liking. Again, these props are listed for full 17 game seasons this year. And for Derrick Henry to eclipse this number, he would have to stay healthy for this duration of time. He would have to be fairly efficient on the ground, which he has been, but he's also not a player that is on the field for every single snap. They will take him off the field on third downs, which is concerning. They add Julio Jones to the offense, suggesting perhaps they'd like to throw the ball more. And last year, it took him 378 carries to reach that 2,000-yard mark. At just a 300-carry season, I'm not sure he gets there. And then you factor in a potential injury or a missed game, something like that. It's going to be hard for Henry to reach these numbers.
378 carries, as you mentioned, last year. 2019, 303 carries, and he landed at 1,540 rushing yards. So I think that's kind of what you're gauging. I also want to point out, I know he's not a prolific pass catcher, but his targets have increased every single year of his career. And I don't think it's unforeseen that a couple carries, once again, are siphoned off for touches with him getting him the ball in terms of receptions. So every little bit counts. Also, this guy, tremendous credit to him. He stayed healthy basically all these seasons where we're looking at these big numbers. So you have that baked in. If there is any sort of injury, you're stealing a ton of value. And if he has to, I don't see 378 carries in the future for Henry. I know he's a monster, but man, that's a lot of volume year after year. I'm going to round it out with, this is, even though I went second here, this is my favorite one. It's our guy. If you're looking on the fantasy football side, and I do want to give a quick shout out to the fantasy football channel that's doing great work over there. Russell Gage is the biggest sleeper we have in terms of ADP, and a guy that I think we need to take notice of. You mentioned Julio. Well, he departs from the Falcons offense, and it creates a void with Ridley on the outside. And I think Russell Gage is primed to push over what is a pretty, I think, generous receiving yards total at 700.5. It's at minus 115. I'm going directly over that. This is a guy, he had 786 yards last year on 110 targets. This year,
welcome you into a Tuesday evening, afternoon, depending on where you are around the planet, edition of the Deeper Dive. And unlike yesterday, where we had 5 and then to 4, kind of a weird, crazy day, we're jamming one game in on a slate before 6:10. This is where we have the extra time, the extra 15 minutes, because we have a jammed full slate to get to today. Myself, and more importantly, Adam is in the house at Ship My Money DFS. Make sure you say hello to Jordan, who's producing the show, up in the chat. The show today is sponsored by both Odd Shopper, and you're going to hear a lot about Odd Shopper, where we continue to tell you is the place to go for all things odds. And as far as betting, well, that's Betting You, where you'll find out everything you need to know about the upcoming college football season, which MAC teams you should be betting on, up to the SEC, to the Heisman. Everything is handled each and every Wednesday, so make sure you have every available episode to you at your hands before you jump into anything else from a college and betting standpoint. Betting You every Wednesday, Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So a little different, I would say, Adam, from yesterday's show, where we're trying to make as much as we possibly can from 4 games after about 20 minutes to now, where we have a gigantic, fully jammed slate. So good afternoon, good evening to you first and foremost, brother.
Yeah, man, how's it going? Shouldn't need to divert into too much Wire or Sopranos talk today, I don't think.
Did you watch Sniper at all?
No, I forgot.
Okay. You were too busy on your showdown slate for San Diego and Miami last night.
Yeah, I was sweating baseball, and then I had to take time to go in and swap off of most of that Brewers game. And
yes, good call on that, by the way.
Yeah, I wish I had done it from the beginning.
Did you not heed your own advice? We even created a scenario here where we took the Cubs and Brewers off stacks.
Well, going in, I had said I was going to play that game and then reevaluate. And so I played it, and then I reevaluated and pretty much got off of it right before lock. But that took some time, and then was doing best ball drafts and just totally forgot about Sniper.
That's fine. I don't think anybody today is going to hold you accountable for not watching Sniper. Maybe for a stack that didn't hit more so than not. All right, so let's look at this overall, right? And we're going to get to every game here. That's what we do in the Deeper Dive. We're going to talk about from stacks to top pitchers, which is free for you, by the way, today on Awesemo. So take full advantage of top pitchers and top golfers heading into the Wyndham tomorrow. But as far as today is concerned, just the big picture that you have, really, whenever we have a 13, 14, 15 game slate, how you approach it, specifically with some games tonight that maybe you're looking a little more forward to getting to than a couple of the others.
Yeah, so I mean, whenever there's 15 games, the raw ownership on players ends up coming down a bit. It makes it so, and like Josh and I were talking about it this morning, there's still certainly going to be teams that I think are over-owned relative to the slate, and that'll be coming underweight on players and or stacks. But it does make it a little bit easier to just say, okay, like I'm going to stack this low-owned team and then still fit in whatever bats I want. Whereas, like on shorter slates, just the first name that comes to mind is Giancarlo Stanton, for example. He's going to be popular tonight, but popular on this slate typically is going to mean like 15 to 20%. Whereas if there were 4 games, 5 games, that might be 35, 40%. And at that ownership, it's just like, okay, I don't want to play him regardless. Whereas tonight, as long as the stack that you're getting to is low owned, you can still go to guys like that. And it's kind of the same thing with pitching. Like on shorter slates, last night you saw Joe Musgrove get something like 65, 70% ownership. I still ended up rostering him a lot, especially once I had to get off of Freddie Peralta. But it was still very concerning that he was going to be that popular. Whereas tonight, even the popular pitchers, looking at Logan Gilbert, looking at Max Scherzer, those guys are getting 35 to 40% ownership, which is, it's still a lot, but it's a lot more manageable than, 75%.
Real quick, it's just a quick generalized question here about pitching, and knowing that we're going to jump right into this game in Pittsburgh. But is there an area where ownership, because it's such a large slate, becomes a problem? I know we're going to get to Scherzer and Gilbert to a lesser extent, but on a 15-game, 30-pitcher option, do you ever look at a number, and it doesn't have to be a hard number, Adam, but like, damn, somebody's 40% owned on a 15-game slate, that might be enough for me to not roster him?
It still comes back to using the top pitchers tool or the top stacks tool, in conjunction with each other, because what really matters is the total ownership of your lineup more so than any individual player. Like when you look at the pitching ownership, for example, you have Logan Gilbert getting 37% at 9,600, Sonny Gray is getting 3% at 10,300. And that's just, this is just sort of an example that's going to work here. Do I think Logan Gilbert is going to beat Sonny Gray that frequently, like that he deserves to be 11 or 12 times the ownership? No, I don't. So it means that you could certainly go to Sonny Gray instead of Logan Gilbert as a spot to differentiate. But at the same time, there's 9 other spots in your lineup that you can use. So it's not some hard rule where it's like, oh, Logan Gilbert's 37% owned, I'm just not going to play him. If I have more popular hitters, somebody like Sonny Gray ends up being a viable way to then lower the total ownership of my lineup. But if I have a low owned stack and Logan Gilbert does project a bit better than Sonny Gray, I have no issue going to the more popular Gilbert. And then also it does matter what contest you're playing too. If you're playing massive field contests, you should be more wary of somebody being 37% owned than if you're playing, a 500 person tournament where he's going to be 37% owned. That's just not as many teams you have to compete with. So it matters what the rest of your lineup looks like. It matters what contests you're playing. But it's mostly just, trying to make it so that your lineup as a whole has a realistic chance at success. It's not so much about one individual player.
All right, let's look at the pitchers. Both of these guys in the St. Louis-Pittsburgh game are going to be cheap options by all means. Happ for 5,900 though is a little bit higher as far as being a top 2 pitcher, and we will keep St. Louis at least in the back of our minds here because we have them pretty high on our top stacks tool. Can't say the same for Pittsburgh as well. So I guess let's start with Happ and how appealing he may be getting to a P2 tonight.
So the price on Happ, I think, is reasonable. He's not a very good pitcher, but the Pirates offense isn't that great either. And I've made the point a lot recently when we've seen some cheap pitcher pricing that, especially in tournaments, like you're not looking at Happ in cash games, but in tournaments, whenever you get a fully stretched out starting pitcher in that 5 to 6K range, you can pretty much always make some sort of a case for him because even bad pitchers or, slightly below average pitchers in the case of Happ are going to have good starts a decent amount of the time, especially when they're facing a team like Pittsburgh. The thing that's going to keep Happ's ownership in check for me right now, and this isn't reflected in our top stack tool yet. I assume that it will be by lock. If not, I personally will be manually adjusting the numbers that I use. Aaron Ashby from the Milwaukee game, only 4,400. He's going to be the guy that I'm using a lot when I'm paying down a pitcher. So that's going to make it a little bit less necessary for me to get to somebody like Happ, but kind of just, looking at Happ in a vacuum for a second, I think it's an okay price tag for him. He is getting 9% ownership right now, which is probably about where it should be. There are some dangerous bats in the Pirates lineup, specifically Ke'Bryan Hayes and Brian Reynolds. But overall, I think it's a little bit cheap, the salary for Happ, even though I don't have a ton of confidence there because he's still just not a very good pitcher.
No issue at all with moving past Brault, or is there anything in you that may run him once or twice in a 100 lineup tournament?
No, I mean, I think we can kind of just move past Brault. He did throw 75 pitches his last time out, which is a reasonable number. And if you're going to get like 80 to 85 tonight, that's fine. You did get Tyler O'Neill scratched from the Cardinals lineup, which is a bump for Brault, but it's still just an entirely right-handed lineup. It does still have quite a bit of power, basically from Carlson down through like Bader and DeYoung. Those guys can do some damage. And Steven Brault's just, he's not a terrible pitcher, but not a very good strikeout pitcher either. Going back to 2019, he's only struck out 18.4% of righties, 163 expected ISO. That's not, a terrible number, but it's also not a great number. I think that I'm more interested in these Cardinals bats than I am in Brault.
Yes, let's do that because we have them pretty high right here as far as, again, this huge slate. Only 4 teams ahead of them when it comes to being the top stack tonight. And not a ton over-owned when you look at who's buying into them compared to where they should finish. So they become pretty appealing just from a number standpoint, I would think.
Yeah, they're not getting much ownership right now. Looking at the top stack tool with St. Louis, you're getting them, I'm refreshing now, but you're getting them, it looks like as the fifth highest top stack percentage at almost 6%, only getting about 4.5% ownership. That has come up a little bit throughout the day, but it just goes back to, I think that it's a reasonably priced team in a reasonably good spot. Losing Tyler O'Neill does make them less appealing again, but other than Goldschmidt and Arenado, this whole team's really inexpensive. Yadi Molina covers the catcher spot for you at only 3,900. Harrison Bader is someone that I'm interested in here because he's got some power and speed. He's also just going to strike out a lot, but Steven Brault doesn't strike out a lot of guys. So that makes me like Bader a little bit more. Paul DeYoung at shortstop is fine. Not the strongest position tonight, especially in the non-pay-up range. Like you have Trey Turner, you have Tim Anderson, but they're both really expensive. If you're trying to save some money, DeYoung I think is fine. So I'm still interested in the Cardinals, but again, I did like them a lot more when we thought Tyler O'Neill was going to play.
Is there anything you're getting to from Pittsburgh, if it's a one-off bat or maybe like a mini stack that you can, because they're super low as far as projection is concerned. They are cheaper, but for where they are predicted to be one of the bottom stacks, they're the highest owned of those stacks because of how cheap they are.
Yeah, it's more so a mini stack or one-off type spot for me. Jay Happ, like we said, just not a very good pitcher. He's really struggled with right-handed power this year. He's only struck out 17% of right-handed hitters this year, while allowing a 248 expected ISO and a 378 expected WOBA. So he's really struggled there. The problem, of course, with the Pirates is just there's not that many hitters that you expect to be able to take advantage of that. But I do think that looking to Ke'Bryan Hayes at 4K on DraftKings, I think 3K on FanDuel, if I remember correctly. I wrote about him in the deep dive today. He's getting 8% ownership on DraftKings. Brian Reynolds, only 4K on DraftKings, getting 3% ownership. There's a lot of very, very good outfield options. So I think it'll be a little bit more difficult to get to Reynolds than Hayes. But both of these guys have power from the right side. Ke'Bryan Hayes, one of the top prospects in all of baseball, just a more talented baseball player at this point than J Happ is. So I think those two look pretty good. You have Anthony Alford at 2,100 batting cleanup. That's just going to be a reasonable value spot. Jacob Stallings as a catcher option is okay. But the guys that really jump out to me are Hayes and Reynolds.
All right, so let's move on. Baltimore now hosting Detroit, and you're not terribly far from me, so it is miserable, humid as all hell up here in Philadelphia. I'm not sure. I imagine it's worse down where you are, so we'll definitely factor that in for sure. Now, as far as the pitching is concerned here, I'm not sure, again, with Keegan Aiken there at the bottom. More so, I guess, if there's interest for Mize, although he's pretty pricey for where he's expected to finish in the top two.
Yeah, I think it's tough to get to pitching here. Keegan Aiken just not very good. The Tigers' offense has some holes, but I still don't really see the need to go to Aiken here. For Casey Mize, you can make a case for him just because the Orioles are certainly capable of allowing a good game to an opposing pitcher. But the thing that the issue I kind of run into is that this is just such a big slate. Going to Casey Mize, who has about a 20% strikeout percentage for the season, 19.2%. It's just kind of a tough sell for me. He has had issues with power. In particular, left-handed power has really done a lot of damage against him. The Orioles do have a few left-handed bats that can do damage. Cedric Mullins at the top, Anthony Santander hitting cleanup, DJ Stewart batting sixth. And then, you do have right-handed bats in Mancini and Hayes in particular that are dangerous. So I don't think it's necessarily a safe spot for Mize. There is some upside from the Orioles, but overall, I just think that there's pitchers I would rather get to on this slate. He'd be more of a guy that, if this were, 5-6 game slate, I could make a stronger case for.
All right. So now we look at this from the opposite standpoint. You mentioned the lineup and still some holes in it, but if we're going to stay away from, and it's not always connected, right? Where if you don't like pitching, therefore you love bats, or vice versa in that case. But looking at both Detroit and Baltimore, we can start in, as far as the hierarchy is concerned. Detroit is the third highest projected stack. Now, granted, they're not running away with anything. New York is only 0.2 ahead of them, and then the White Sox sit at the only double-digit percentage. But Detroit is there, and for where they're projected, they're actually under-owned, even if it's only by 0.6%. That's a lot right there. I would think that you could work with, especially since there are a couple of other stacks, especially New York and the White Sox, I would say, that are above them.
Yeah, the Tigers and the Orioles both kind of fit that mold that I was talking about at the top of the show, where I doubt that I get a lot of full stacks of either of these teams because they are projected to go over-owned. And if you run 5 guys from these teams, you are looking at a decent amount of lineup or of ownership in your lineup. But individually, there's still a lot of good plays here that you can get to. And if you're combining them with a team that is getting not much ownership, it's not like you're getting 20-25% ownership on any of these guys. So like Anthony Santander, for example, at 2,600, I think is a good play. He's also projected for like 17% ownership on DraftKings. I'd be more interested in mixing him in to a low-owned stack of another team than, say, combining a 17% Santander with a 15% Mullins and a 14% Urias. That's kind of getting a lot of ownership there, and the same can be said for Detroit guys. I think Eric Haas is a high upside play. I think Grossman's a good play. I think Scope is a good play. I prefer them sort of mixed in with, stacks that are 2-3% owned than with a bunch of other Tigers or Orioles, because then you're just getting a lot of ownership together.
All right. So before we move on here, let's look at, I guess, Detroit and Baltimore from a mini stack standpoint. Although I'd imagine that Detroit would probably be more of the appeal for a 5-man or a DK as opposed to a 2. But if we're working ownership and some leverage on other stacks, we'll get to the Dodgers, Cincinnati, some others that may jump out. Is there a 2 to 3 man stack that you really enjoy from Detroit? And can you get something, as you mentioned, with the model from Baltimore, even if it's a 2-man stack?
Yeah, so I mean, with Detroit, I think Jonathan Scope at 9% looks pretty good. Eric Haas is expensive enough that he's not getting tons of ownership. So I think, Haas, Grossman, Scope, or something like that is fine as long as you're pairing it with lower owned guys. One guy individually that stands out from Baltimore that isn't getting as much ownership and I think is in a good spot is DJ Stewart at only 2,400. He's batting sixth. He's projected for about 6% ownership. So that's batting sixth is just going to make him a little bit lower owned than guys like Santander and Mullins. But Stewart does have power from the left side. Casey Mize this year has allowed a 267 expected ISO to left-handed hitters. Since 2019, Stewart has a 195 ISO against righties. So not, a great hitter overall, but someone that does have power, is hitting in favorable conditions in Camden Yards. So I do like DJ Stewart individually. I like, I like the value on Santander. I think it's a good spot for Mullins, but they are getting ownership. And then one negative to mention for Mullins too, that I mentioned this morning, Casey Mize has allowed 0 stolen bases this year. So when you're rostering Mullins, he has power, but he also steals bases. Doesn't really set up as a spot where it's likely he has stolen base success, at least while Mize is in the game.
All right, let's move on. I mentioned the weather here is just brutally humid, so take that for what it's worth. Charlie Manuel used to say it's hitting season around this time. So you've got the Dodgers coming into Philadelphia. Philadelphia has won 8 straight, and the lineups out that don't necessarily love it as far as I don't know why Joe Girardi continues to insist on leading anybody else but Gene Segura off, but let's look at the pitching first, and this is a big one. Max Scherzer, 4th time pitching this year at Citizens Bank Park. Aaron Nola, who I'll say this is the biggest start of his Phillies career. So take those two into account, Adam, as you look at these two pitchers.
Yeah, I mean, Scherzer, the top projected pitcher on the slate, he's getting quite a bit of ownership. It's a tough park to pitch in, but this is a little bit of a watered down Phillies lineup as well. You don't have Rhys Hoskins out there. McCutchen, we know, is on the injured list. So, like Odubel Herrera isn't a great hitter. Brad Miller has power, but he'll strike out. Torreyes, Jankowski, Nola to round out this lineup is
not good.
Pretty weak. So there's still guys that can do damage, but it's a little bit more forgiving lineup than it typically would be for the Phillies. And I think that benefits Scherzer as well. There's a lot of pay up pitchers on this slate that have good stuff and have a path to success. I kind of used that example at the top of Logan Gilbert versus Sonny Gray in terms of ownership, but the same thing can be said about Scherzer versus Gray. I don't think Scherzer should, if you're just looking at like those two pitchers, should get, 11 times the ownership. He probably shouldn't be getting 4 times the ownership of Aaron Nola, but because it all comes back to your lineup as a whole and not just one individual spot, I still think Scherzer is a very good play. I expect to get to a lot of him. He's, got the highest strikeout percentage on the slate. The only thing he's really struggled with this year is he's had some home run issues, 1.45 home runs per 9, but 3.43 xFIP is very good. Highest strikeout percentage on the slate, highest K minus BB percentage on the slate by like 5 points at 28.1%. Clearly just I think most talented pitcher on the slate, and I have no issues getting there. For Nola on the other side, you can make the case to get to him at relatively low ownership at 9%. He has been better at home basically every year over the last few years. That's been the case this year as well. The issue that I run into here is the Dodgers are good. And for example, you have Sonny Gray, I think, has a little bit better matchup against Atlanta. Atlanta's dangerous too, but I don't think they're quite as dangerous as the Dodgers. You also have, Sean Manaea getting less ownership than Nola in that price range. It does benefit Nola that Mookie Betts isn't in the lineup. This is a little bit weaker lineup than you typically get from the Dodgers. Cody Bellinger, Josh and I were talking about this morning, I assume at some point is going to start hitting better, but he's just been absolutely awful this year. Billy McKinney's not overly scary. And then, you don't have a DH here either. But I'd still think if I'm going low owned pitcher in risky spot, I would rather go to someone like Sonny Gray or Sean Manaea than go to Aaron Nola.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. And just watching Nola more so from the eye than the DFS standpoint, it makes so much sense as you lay that out. It's a risk, and he's not a number 1. Clearly, he's barely a 2, if that, on his best day. And this game, man, you win 6 in a row, 7 in a row, 8 in a row. It's going to catch up to you. And you come off beating your chest because you shut the Mets down. Great. They can't hit, although we'll get to them coming up. Now this is a completely different I pounded the Dodgers tonight. I've taken them 3 different ways. Everybody in Philadelphia is running me out of here. So I'm with you. I actually think if you're going to get some offense, it's going to come from the Dodgers. And that's where we can look at from a stack standpoint. Although I did see Blitz and some others in the chat giving some love to that Philly stack. How could you still, as Adam just laid out that lineup, probably more people that you'd have to struggle to identify than not. But with that said, let's look at the Dodgers stack here because, yes, what you say about Nola makes sense, especially from the low ownership compared to others, although Gray is the better pivot, as I agree with you. The stack here, I think, is a little bit different, right, where it's just about these bats in this park and the weather as well. I love the Dodgers, and I have no problem paying up as they are the most or second most expensive stack on the entire slate.
Yeah, the only real concern I have is their ownership has come up a bit since this morning. I think that the team became a little bit easier to stack once you lost Mookie Betts. Obviously it's less appealing without him, but now suddenly you only have 3 hitters that are 5K or higher, only 2 that are really expensive with Turner and Muncy at 5,800 and 5,600. It would just be a lot more difficult to full stack this team if Mookie were in there. So we have seen the ownership come up a little bit. I don't love getting to a semi-popular team against a pitcher as good as Aaron Nola. So there's a couple of spots ownership-wise that I like a little bit more, but it is still certainly a very high upside team. And the other thing that stands out, Trey Turner getting, like 7% ownership is still the highest here. So this is an example of, they're projected to go a little bit over-owned compared to their chances of being the top stack, but they're still a low-owned team with a lot of power. Max Muncy is 1.7%. I think he really stands out. Corey Seager, 3%. Turner also on DraftKings now has multi-position eligibility with second base and shortstop. That's pretty nice. Muncy has multi-position eligibility as well. So I still think it's a good stack. I just don't like them quite as much as I did this morning.
So as far as Philadelphia is concerned, you mentioned the lineup, but I am curious, last 3 hits, home runs. I mean, Bryce Harper is on a tear right now. MVP race has tightened up a little bit. Can you justify getting to him? Is there a 2-man stack even? And I like Segura Harper, for example. Does that appease you at all as far as a mini stack on Philadelphia?
It doesn't. I mean, I'm never going to tell anyone not to play Bryce Harper. He's really good, but I think there's a lot of outfielders that I would get to before Harper against Scherzer. The only real argument I can see for the Phillies is in massive field tournaments. If you want to stack against a 35% owned pitcher, that's fine. The Phillies are in a good hitter's park. They do still have some good bats in their lineup, but for me personally, I expect that I'll just get to plenty of other spots that are low owned and not facing Max Scherzer.
Now, I saw this earlier. You referenced what you wrote on the deeper dive earlier today and had to do with Pete Alonso as a guy that you like. And here I am thinking, well, okay, Washington's in town. Yes, they've kind of given up, and they are a super heavy dog at plus 206 we have on Odd Shopper. That's total sitting at 8.5. Just saw a 3-game series where the Mets just forgot how to connect their bat with the ball. And I'm thinking, well, maybe we'd stay away. We'll get to the stacks coming up in a second, but let's start as we do with the pitching matchup first. Carrasco sitting there at 8K, and then kind of, Espino is kind of there at the bottom at 5,700. But there is clearly a cost factor in there if you're looking to roll at that. But Carrasco there at 8K, we have him pretty high projected, and he's not really owned much. So I wonder if there's some leverage that you can work with him.
So his ownership has come down since earlier today.
Yeah.
It was like 16% on the show this morning with Josh. It was 20% when I wrote the deep dive article. Now we have it down to 9%, which makes a lot more sense to me. The issue here, it's a really, really good matchup. No doubt about that. The Nats aren't good. You basically have Juan Soto and Josh Bell. And outside of that, as long as you don't make a mistake, they're not going to hit you. So it's a really good spot for Carrasco. The issue is that he's only made 2 starts since coming back from the injured list. He threw 58 pitches and then he threw 62 pitches. I just can't say with any level of confidence that you're suddenly going to get like 6 innings out of Carlos Carrasco here. Could it happen? I guess so, but it just doesn't seem likely. And at $8,000 on a slate with 29 other pitchers, I don't think, granted, pitcher, you can win tournaments with a mediocre game from a pitcher, but you're still not trying to get that. You're not saying, I think this 8K pitcher can get me 15 points, and that's great, because, it's still not. To get something like around 22 points from Carrasco, you're going to need, and let's say he goes 5 innings, you're going to need him to get the win and then probably strike out like 6 or 7 guys in those 5 innings. He can do that, but it's not super likely. So with the ownership coming down to 9%, he becomes a little bit more appealing than if you were 16 to 20%. But I still just have a hard time getting a lot of him because it's hard to see where that top end outcome comes from. I think in a lot of games, he does okay for $8,000, but it's just really hard to see where he puts up that score where it's just like, oh man, I'm really glad I played Carlos Carrasco. And with, even in a good matchup with any pitcher, there's always just the risk that they have a bad start. So I try when I can avoid it, I try not to roster guys too heavily where it's just like, I don't really know that they have the opportunity to give me a monster score, but they do have the opportunity to give me a bad score because every single pitcher does. It just kind of ends up being like a risk reward situation that I'm not really comfortable with. So I do think it's a good matchup. I do think at 9%, it's okay, but I doubt that I get over the field on him just because it's hard to envision a scenario where he puts up a score that I have to have or that I really want. It's just hard to see how if I don't roster Carrasco, how he puts something up that makes it so I can't win a tournament.
Right, like you're regretting it and then tweeting out at Ship My Money DFS the next day, which is I can't believe I burned fill in the blank K, not rostering Carrasco.
Right, exactly. Okay. Like the most likely outcome is Carrasco puts up a game where if I don't have him, I just say, oh, that would have been nice, but I can still probably make that up with one of the other 29 pitchers going today.
Yeah, and you mentioned the dropping ownership as well, so I'm sure that's factoring in here on that slate. Again, I imagine it's going to be a long shot on the other end, 5,700. You don't even know how long he's going to go. Is there any interest at all, or we just move to the bats?
Yeah, I'm not looking at Espino here. Just not a good enough pitcher. He's stretched out enough, but doesn't really get strikeouts. There's nothing about him that makes me think he's going to be good. He's had issues with power. There's other value pitching that I would rather get to.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I could think of is if people believe that what we saw from this past weekend is who the Mets are now, and it's going to be 4 innings of, 3K no-run ball for Espino, but that's a huge ask.
Yeah, and I mean, we know who these hitters are in the Mets lineup. It's still a pretty good lineup, a lot of power in there, and yeah, it's just, he's a below average pitcher that I think is going to have difficulty navigating what is, at least 5 or 6 pretty good hitters. You can say what you want about VR and McCann, but 1 through 6, this is a pretty dangerous lineup.
So let's look at the Mets stack here. We'll look at a couple of bats, and I'll tell everybody about what's happening here on site. Some pretty cool offers here for Awesemo Plus and, of course, Awesemo Plus Platinum. But before that, as we wind down in this game here, let's look at the Mets. You wrote about them, Alonso as well. So from the stack to Alonso and anybody in between, how appealing is New York for you tonight, Mets-wise, New York?
So I really, really liked the pricing in terms of like they're underpriced. The problem is that is going to drive up their ownership. So this is another team where I think it's kind of similar to the Orioles, kind of similar to the Tigers. I like the spot for them, but they're just getting a little bit more ownership in the aggregate than I would like. But individually, I still think hitters look really, really good. So mixing them into some of the other low-owned stacks. Peter Alonso, I love the spot for him. I don't know why he's so inexpensive. Only 4,200 on DraftKings, 3,800 on FanDuel. Espino has really had issues with right-handed power this year. 251 expected ISO, only a 20% strikeout percentage against them. Peter Alonso looks really, really good. JD Davis, I think, is actually a pretty sneaky play in tournaments because he's someone that has some strikeout issues, but he also has a lot of power. Going back to the start of the 2019 season, 526 plate appearances against right-handed pitching, 371 expected WOBA, 202 expected ISO. He's someone that I think can do quite a bit of damage, and he's only projected for about 5% ownership. Really, really cheap prices on Nimmo, on Conforto, on Dominic Smith, and they're all, between 4 and 7% owned. So I think it's a good spot, and I think I'll be mixing those guys in the form mostly of mini stacks here.
Now, we're talking about anything different with, Washington is super low projected. The cost and ownership doesn't really make a great leverage play. So is this more about working Mets stacks and mini stacks tonight?
Yeah, it's mostly about the Mets. There's just not much that I think I want to get to from Washington. There's enough value on this slate with there being 30 offenses that I don't think it's that appealing there. And Carrasco is, typically a good pitcher. He's been pretty good since coming back from the injured list in his 2 starts as well. You can certainly look to a $3,800 Bell or $5,600 Soto, but this just doesn't strike me as a slate where I'm going to be getting to a lot of the other stuff from the Mets.
All right, we'll keep it moving and remind you. Now, it's not just about betting you, which we told you here at the top, where it's our brand new podcast where you can get informed on everything, especially leading up to the college football season. I know Rasa's all geeked up about that, but it's about our 2 new YouTube channels that we have here for you, right? Where already you are fully inundated of what we're doing here on the mothership, the big one here on Awesemo. But now with Awesemo Fantasy Football and Awesemo Odds, we're giving you 2 new channels. One with our fantasy football channel where it's specifically content driven from videos. You see Lofty constantly breaking stuff down. We got the fantasy football show. Everything is happening now catered to getting you ready from best ball contests to dailies to weekly, season long, whatever it may be in DFS for fantasy football. So we want you to subscribe there. And of course, the odds channel where, if you're a betting junkie or you can't get enough of it like me, then you're constantly locked in. But here's the beauty of it. You can be subscribed to all 3. So that's all we ask, right? You hit us up with a like this video and every other video that you watch. You should have already. Subscribe to the channel like we constantly tell you, because that does us wonder. It really helps us build what we're doing. So from the fantasy football channel to the Awesemo Odds channel to what we're doing here on the mothership, Awesemo, we want you to be subscribed to everything and that notification bell so you never miss a thing at all. All right, man, we keep it moving. We're pretty good pacing so far. Maybe it's just because of us stretching out what we had last night. Tonight's going to feel like it's flying. Boston hosting Tampa Bay. That total sits at 9.5 on OddsShopper. It's a pretty tight overall money line between the two. So let's look at the pitching matchup first. 9,300 on DraftKings for Eduardo Rodriguez, and he's the guy between the two. Not that Patino is much lower at 8,300, but those two are pretty much only separated really by a Zach Gallen as far as being the top 2 pitcher tonight on the slate. So let's look at both of these guys, and maybe I'll preemptively ask you if you like both. Are you getting to, or can you see yourself getting to any lineups on DK in a bigger tournament with 100 plus where these are your P1, P2 guys?
This game is really, really interesting. You mentioned it before. I don't remember what game we were talking about, but you said something along the lines of like, just because you like pitching doesn't mean you hate the offenses or vice versa.
That's what you've told me and taught me here. Yeah,
well, Boston, it seems like, is in a lot of those games. And this is one of them because both of these offenses are really dangerous. But at the same time, I have interest in the pitching, particularly Eduardo Rodriguez. He's only projected for 11% ownership on DraftKings. He's 9,300. On FanDuel, he's only 8K, projected for 7% ownership. This is a pitcher who I think has gotten pretty unlucky this year, but has really, really good stuff. He actually has the 3rd highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 28.9%. He's tied with Logan Gilbert for the 3rd highest K minus BB percentage. He has a 3.3 xFIP, which is about 2 full runs lower than his ERA. The walk rate is fine. He has allowed 1.2 home runs per 9. But even if you look at, his expected ISO numbers versus his ISO numbers, his expected WOBA versus his WOBA, it just seems like he's gotten pretty unlucky. Tampa Bay has a dangerous offense that can do some damage, but they also have some strikeouts in this lineup. And Rodriguez, it's going to be a predominantly right-handed lineup, but Rodriguez this season has struck out 31 points. That's Patino. Rodriguez has struck out 28.5% of right-handed hitters, 122 expected ISO. They certainly can, get lucky and just park a couple balls over the green monster on, routine fly balls, and that'll ruin the day for Rodriguez. But with him not getting that much ownership and with him being a really high upside pitcher, I am definitely interested in him here, even though I also do have interest in the raised bats in tournaments as well.
All right, so how often do you come into something like this, and does it matter? I assume it's case by case, but how often do you find pitching just winning out as far as, if you had to make that choice?
So if I were just playing like in 3-max, for example, I haven't made my lineups, but I would think there's a good chance I get one Tampa Bay stack in there, and then I wouldn't be surprised if I end up with Rodriguez in one of my other lineups. This is just a spot where I think just about every aspect of this game looks good. Like it's because what happens is people typically rely a little bit too much on medium projections and they don't think about range of outcomes. So what happens in a spot like this, where you have a very high upside pitcher like Rodriguez, you have a very high upside offense in Tampa Bay, and then even to some extent on the other side, a high upside pitcher in Patino and a high upside offense for the Red Sox. What happens is they're going to project sort of just like mediocre, because Tampa Bay is going to do damage a decent amount of time. It's a tough matchup. And the same goes for, the Red Sox versus Patino, but you need to think in terms of, what can these guys do in any individual game? And there's going to be some games where it's just kind of like a middling outcome and it's 4-3 and both pitchers are mediocre and both offenses are mediocre. There's going to be a lot of games where Eduardo Rodriguez just dominates the Rays because he's really good. And there's going to be some games where the Rays just dominate Rodriguez because they're also really good. And so it makes sense, especially, if you're playing 20 lineups or 150 lineups, it makes sense to be overweight on both sides of that because there's going to be so many times where the Rays have a very good outcome or Boston has Rodriguez has a very good outcome, even though their median projections are kind of mediocre.
So it's one or the other as far as stacks are concerned, clearly, right? I mean, you're not going to take both pitchers out of here and run both stacks. But could you do that with both pitchers?
Yeah, I mean, you're obviously not playing them together, but like I fully expect in my 150 max stuff that I'm overweight on the Red Sox, that I'm overweight on the Rays, and then I'm overweight on Eduardo Rodriguez. Like that's what I'm expecting to happen, and I'm hoping does happen. I've set up my process to hopefully make things like that happen. In 3 max, I think it's not. You don't necessarily have to have every side, in 3 max if you're playing limited lineups. But I think that playing Rodriguez is a good option, and I think stacking Tampa Bay is one of the most under-owned stacks right now. So. I think they both are very strong plays in tournaments.
You mentioned Manaea a couple of times here at 10K. Oakland is in Cleveland. So let's start with him. And I mean, the flip side could be as far as if you're going to spend down or pay down, I assume, for anything on Cleveland's side with Tristan. But let's look at the one guy that you have referenced a lot, especially in comparison to like a Nola or somebody else that's a higher cost pitcher on this slate.
Yeah, so
for Manaea, pardon me.
Yeah. No, I like Manaea here. Cleveland's implied run total is a little bit higher than I would expect. I think probably has to do with the weather. I think it's pretty hot and humid in Cleveland. But Manaea is a good pitcher. The Indians have basically 2 good hitters in Ramirez and Reyes. And then the other, they have other guys like Rosario and Harold Ramirez and Mercado that they can do some damage on mistakes. But Manaea, I think, is the more talented option there. Kind of surprised he's only getting 7% ownership. We've seen Cleveland, lit up Luis Castillo yesterday, made life difficult for him. But we've seen them give up plenty of big games to not very good pitchers recently. Manaea is a very good pitcher, I think. Comes in with a 26.9% strikeout percentage, 21.4% K-minus BB percentages, just behind Gilbert and Eduardo Rodriguez. 3.38 xFIP is excellent. We've seen the ceiling games from him recently too. He's coming off of a rough start against San Diego, but prior to that, we had back-to-back 30-point games against the Padres and I don't remember somebody else, but you kind of saw the upside that Manaea gives you. If he's only going to get 7% ownership, this is another guy where I think you can move some of that, maybe some of that Logan Gilbert exposure, maybe some of the Scherzer exposure, Alex Wood exposure, to Manaea, because I think that his range of outcomes really isn't any different than somebody like Alex Wood, who's getting 3 times the ownership.
On the flip side here, as far as Cleveland is concerned, any interest in spending down significantly?
For the bats?
No, I'm sorry, for the pitcher.
Oh, for McKenzie.
Tristan McKenzie, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really tough spot for him, I think. He's got really good stuff. He strikes out a lot of guys, but he also struggles with his control, gets behind in counts, walks a ton of hitters, and then also gives up a lot of home runs, probably because he's working behind in counts so often. And then you get a really, really dangerous Oakland lineup here. A lot of good hitters. I think they're going to be able to make, to work McKenzie, get deep in the counts, drive up the pitch count, and then do some damage. So I have trouble getting to McKenzie here, even though he does have really good strikeout stuff. I'd be more interested in looking to Oakland bats, but they're also projected to get some ownership. So, I think individually, Matt Olson looks good against McKenzie. I think Starling Marte looks good. Kana looks good. Really, the whole lineup, especially, like 1 through 6, looks good for Oakland. But I think more so one-offs and mini stacks for me. But it's really, really tough to get to McKenzie.
Yeah, and just looking at where we have Oakland, it's not, as far as being the 4th projected highest stack, their ownership isn't terribly overweight by any means. So while you're still dealing with somewhat of a negative leverage, I mean, for 30 teams on this full slate, it's not anything I would think that would be a deterrent. And then Cleveland, on the flip side, we have much lower, but unfortunately, you're going to pay up for those bats, but you still have them super low owned for Cleveland. So maybe there is some, if it's not a 5-man stack for Cleveland, maybe you're working more of a 3 or 2-man stack.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough for me to get to much of Cleveland. You can always make a case for Jose Ramirez or Franmil Reyes, but they're both really, really expensive here too. So it's tough to prioritize them. Reyes at a really deep outfield position as well. Like you can get a lot of power for a lot less money in the outfield on this slate. And Minaya is just a good pitcher that I'm not really in a hurry to pick on. He's held righties this year to a 139 expected ISO, 23.8% strikeout percentage against righties. Cleveland, one of the lower top stack percentages on the slate too. It's just really tough for me to get to them.
All right, so let's move on then, right? Is there any other individual bat that we did? You mentioned a couple on Oakland as far as the matchup, so we can move to Atlanta?
Yeah, I think we can go to the Atlanta game.
All right, also 9.5. And just so you mentioned that implied total for Cleveland, that total overall sits at 9.5. That's a big number. So just based on what you were saying about Cleveland and their implied number being a little inflated, I might be inclined to pop a little under bet on that 9.5. Same number in Atlanta, Cincinnati in Atlanta. Now you mentioned the stack and the bats for the Braves, especially as a pivot here for an earlier game. But let's start on the mound first and foremost here. Sonny Gray is another name that you talked about, especially in response to kind of looking at Aaron Nola. So let's start with Sonny Gray and see how much you're getting to him, and then Drew Smyly to a lesser extent.
I really like Sonny Gray in tournaments here. It's risky. Atlanta's certainly got a potent offense, but we have Gray projected to be the fourth highest scoring pitcher tonight behind Scherzer, Gilbert, and Nola. He's a little bit less expensive than Nola, a little bit less expensive than Scherzer. But the thing that really stands out is that we have him getting like 4% ownership. In our most recent our most recent update, Aaron Nola's ownership increased. I'm guessing as a result of bets being out. So we have 29% ownership going to Scherzer, 40% to Gilbert, 13% to Nola, and then Sonny Gray is next at 3.8%. One thing I like about this Atlanta lineup is, we've talked about the additions they made at the trade deadline. They added a lot of power to this lineup with Jorge Soler and Adam Duvall, but these are both guys that also strike out at a high rate. So you added more upside for the opposing pitcher in addition to adding more risk. Gray can pick up some strikeouts when you're talking about Soler, Riley, Swanson, Duvall being four hitters in the top six of this lineup. Sonny Gray has the second highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 29.1%. 3.26 xFIP this year is very good. I'm interested in him in tournaments. Like I wouldn't look to him in cash games. I do think it's a risky spot. You should just be going to Scherzer or Gilbert probably if you're paying up in cash games. But in tournaments, I really like the upside that Sonny Gray offers here, and he's getting virtually no ownership.
What about Drew Smyly? Just more of an afterthought here, or you start to look at that price 6,900 at home. Cincinnati, not necessarily the highest of stacks, but they're pretty high projected overall of the slate. Is there any Smyly in your lineups tonight?
Yeah, I don't really see it. Only a 20% strikeout percentage for Smyly, 1.78 home runs per nine this year, 4.8 xFIP. Again, it's just I don't really see the need to go there when if I want to take a risky pitcher, I can just pay all the way down for Aaron Ashby from Milwaukee. The Reds, I kind of hate the lineup they're running out. I wish Jesse Winker was in there. Drew Smyly really doesn't have, he's not good against lefties either. So I kind of wish that they had just run a better lineup out there, but it's still a dangerous lineup when you have India, Stevenson, Castellanos, Votto. Aquino has plenty of power. Farmer's okay. Suarez is okay. It's still a pretty good lineup. And Smyly, just gives up a lot of power. 271 expected ISO to lefties this year, 173 to righties. I don't really see a strong case for Drew Smyly here.
Now, on the flip side, as far as the bats are concerned, talked about if you're not going to roll with Smyly by any means, Cincinnati, how appealing is that stack before we kind of look at Atlanta?
Yeah, I like Cincinnati. As a whole, they're projected to go a bit under-owned here. I'm surprised we only have Castellanos projected for 6% ownership. That's really, really appealing to me. And it does make some sense because I think it's just a matter of there's so many outfielders on this slate. There's a lot of really good value bets in the outfield. So Castellanos does drop off a little bit in terms of ownership, but I think it's a great spot for him. I mentioned that Smiley's had issues with power. Going back to the start of the 2019 season, Nick Castellanos, 399 expected WOBA, 277 expected ISO against left-handed pitching. Just phenomenal numbers for a guy that's 4,400 on DraftKings. You get power at catcher in Tyler Stevenson. You get power and stolen base upside from India. I mentioned that Smiley's had issues with left-handed hitters as well. So you can get a low-owned Joey Votto. You have to pay up for him, but it's still not a bad matchup for him. Aquino gives you some power upside. One concern I have, and again, this is kind of it's kind of tough to do anything with it, like other than just understand you're taking on a little bit more risk. But Jesse Winker not being in the lineup, he's going to pinch hit at some point in this game, you would think. Who knows who it's going to be for? Maybe it'll be for the pitcher. Maybe it'll be for Aquino if, Aquino's coming up against a righty in a big spot. But Winker's going to hit at some point in this game and probably sub in for somebody. So that adds a little bit of risk. But still, I think it's a pretty good spot for Cincinnati, and they're not getting much ownership here.
Yeah, and there's leverage, as you mentioned, because of the under-owned stack. Now, Atlanta is going to be a little bit lower as far as where we have them projected, but it's not by a ton. I mean, technically on this 30-team, 15-game slate, it's not even a full point just over, I should say, a full point that separates them. And like Cincinnati, for similar reasons, because you're going to pay up for these bats, they're also super under-owned, but just a little underowned as far as where they're projected. So maybe not as much leverage by a minuscule amount here, Adam, but do both work where you could get to kind of Atlanta for a similar reason as you're getting to Cincinnati? Or are you just out on the Braves?
It's okay. I have so much respect for Sonny Gray. Atlanta is projected to go on their own. I mean, it doesn't look like a terrible spot. They're favored in this game somehow, which doesn't make any sense to me. They do have a lot of power. It's just with Gray, he's a good pitcher. He's held righties to a 132 expected ISO this year. Lefties are sub 100, 33.5% strikeout percentage against lefties, 25% against righties. He generally does a good job getting ground balls as well. He has allowed 1.2 home runs per 9, which is elevated, but he comes into this game with a 49.3% ground ball percentage, which is pretty good. If this slate were smaller, I'd be a little bit more interested in Atlanta. As is, I think there's just a few spots I like more that are just in a little bit better spots than facing Sonny Gray.
All right, so we move to Chicago, Milwaukee, Chicago, the rainout last night that got a lot of people here. Now let's look at the pitching matchup first. Is there anything that jumps out that, again, based off of what happened last night, so whether we're always going to factor that in, but let's start with the pitching here in Chicago.
So I'm not interested in Alec Mills. I'm very interested in $4,400 Aaron Ashby on DraftKings. He's $5,500 on FanDuel. On the one pitcher site, I don't really think he matters. But $4,400 on DraftKings is really appealing. So this guy's only made one major league appearance. He actually faced the Cubs back on June 30th. About as bad as it can go. Gave up 7 runs, 4 earned in 2/3 of an inning, walked 3 guys, didn't strike out anybody, was pulled after facing 10 hitters, lost 10 DraftKings points. But he's put up really, really good numbers at AAA this year. He's one of Milwaukee's top pitching prospects. He's got a 36% strikeout percentage at AAA. His walks have been elevated there, but other than that, everything's looked really, really good in his numbers. They're calling him up here on the second leg of the doubleheader to make a spot start. He had some shortened outings at AAA recently, but he went 6 innings in his most recent appearance. So I think you can at least get like 4 or 5 innings out of him here, assuming he pitches relatively well. This is obviously a much, much different Cubs lineup than they had at the end of June when he faced them before. The hitting conditions are favorable here. The wind is blowing out. It is relatively warm, but at 4,400, it's just, there's not a ton of risk there. Like, obviously, if he loses 10 fantasy points, that's still really bad. But most of, his range of outcomes, it's just so hard for somebody at 4,400 to hurt you. And it is a pretty bad Cubs lineup. You don't even have Wilson Contreras because he caught the first game. So just a really watered down Cubs lineup for a guy that's striking out 36% of hitters at AAA. I'm not sure why, I think I mentioned it before. I'm not sure why we have Aaron Ashby so low in the top pitchers tool. I'm guessing that changes between now and lock. I also think he is more than 3% owned, but either way, I just really want to get the Ashby here at 4,400.
Yeah, there's really no number that's going to offset your interest, right? I mean, if he finishes before lock at 9.5% owned on this slate, I can't imagine that you're going to be like, all of the great positive reasons why you could take a risk on him are now out because 6% more people are owning him.
Yeah, exactly. I would start to care if he were like 6K or something like that. But at 4,400, it's just whatever. I'm playing the guy and moving forward.
And you mentioned that you want nothing to do with Mills, correct?
Yeah, I just don't really see much reason to get to Mills. I think he's a decent real life pitcher, but not great strikeout stuff. 6,600 is cheap, but not that cheap. I'm much more interested in just going to Ashby here.
Cubs are going to be cheaper on this slate, so there's going to be some appeal, but we have them just at the bottom by all means. So let's focus in on Milwaukee, especially because you're out on Mills. Where, not to say that, again, you mentioned real life versus DFS, so I don't want to leave people thinking like, all right, Mills sucks tonight from a DFS standpoint, but just looking, or in real life standpoint, but looking at Milwaukee, again, on the top, if you will, maybe that halfway point on this large slate as far as being the top stack, and from where they are, nearly or just under half owned. So they aren't being heavily purchased, at least now so far. That may change as we get closer, but Milwaukee, for a team that's kind of in that Mets, Atlanta, and we'll get to San Diego range, they have some pretty good leverage simply because of their low ownership, I think.
Yeah, I'm kind of confused why their top stack percentage is as high as it is. I think that comes down to because this is only a 7-inning game. So, like, on the one hand, they do have a decent implied run total at 4.7. So yeah, I mean, I guess it does make sense why they are where they are. It is good hitting conditions in Chicago. Still going to be really difficult for me to get there just because you're still sacrificing upside. Like, they can have a good game in 7 innings, but you're just putting yourself at a huge disadvantage going to a team that's going to hit 7 times when there's 28 teams or 26 teams that are going to hit 9 times.
Okay, so individual bats before we get out of here. Maybe Milwaukee is the way to do that, to kind of get around having to, even if it's a 2-man stack here, because you mentioned that they at least have the ability to hit. Is there any interest in a smaller stack or one-off before we move to Houston?
Not really. It's just I don't really want to sacrifice at bats.
Fair enough, my friend. All right, let's move to Houston. 8.5 there as the projected total. Not a huge dog by any means for Colorado, plus 161 coming into town. Odd Shopper, sponsor of our show today. So you want to make sure that you are there for everything. All of the work, the homework is done for you. And we love that, right? Where you don't have to do much work. You just show up and you get the best available odds. So let's look at Houston here hosting Colorado. Odorizzi, right, is 7,700 on DK. So he would be the higher guy between the two, projected to be a top 2 pitcher. Not that John Gray is completely out of it, but man, at 9,100 in Houston, that's a pretty big ask for that much money, I think.
Yeah, it's just really tough, I think, to get to John Gray here, because the thing is, even if you're looking, like, if you're, let's say you're willing to roll the dice on a talented pitcher in a tough matchup at low ownership, there's still options that I think look better. You know, Eduardo Rodriguez, yeah, he's not as low owned, but still, you know, I think is a higher upside pitcher than John Gray. Sonny Gray is a higher upside pitcher. Sean Manaea, I think, is a higher upside pitcher. There's, you know, even, and then you can save a little bit of money. You could go to someone like Luis Patino, who's getting like 1% ownership. So I think it's just really, really difficult to make a real case for John Gray here in a tough matchup against Houston. They're getting Michael Brantley back as well, which, you know, is just another very good hitter in this lineup. I think John Gray is a good pitcher. I just don't think he has quite as much upside as some of the other low-owned pitchers that are also in dangerous matchups. So really, really tough for me to get to Gray. Odorizzi on the other side is, I think, a good option. He's not a very good pitcher, but he's affordably priced. He's 7,700. The Rockies active roster has the lowest WRC plus against right-handed pitching this year. They basically have Trevor Story, like McMahon's okay, Blackman's okay, Cron's okay, but it's just not a good team. You're getting them outside of Coors. Odorizzi for the season has only struck out about 21% of hitters. He's allowed a lot of power, 1.96 home runs per 9 for Odorizzi this year, 4.81 xFIP. Those numbers are pretty bad, but again, it's just not that many guys on the Rockies that you expect to take advantage of that. Huge park downgrade for them. So I understand why Odorizzi is getting the ownership. I don't anticipate taking a big stand where like I'm playing more than 19 or 20%, but I think getting around the field on Odorizzi makes sense.
So from a bat standpoint, if you're trying to take advantage of the pitching matchup here, especially if it's not so much the number with John Gray, but looking at the offenses here, and again, we'll factor in that we have a lower total at 8.5 compared to a bunch of other games on the slate. Colorado clearly not at home, so that's going to change things drastically, and they're going to be either at the bottom of that middle tier or the top of the bottom tier, depending on where you look at it to break the slate. I am more interested, though, to start at least with Houston, because they are a little bit cheaper compared to the other stacks that we have kind of in that bottom top range, if you will, but they are getting owned more so than the ones around them outside of the Orioles that are just cheaper in general. Is that enough maybe of a deterrent, or do you like what you're seeing from Houston and maybe get to that based on the matchup as well?
I like them as value bats. I don't love the matchup because Gray, I think, is a pretty good pitcher. But I just kind of think 3,300 Michael Brantley is underpriced. 4K Kyle Tucker is underpriced. Yordan Alvarez at 4,700 probably should be a little bit more expensive. And they're not getting tons of ownership. It's just more so that they're getting more ownership than teams like the Reds and the Rays, who are right around them in terms of chances of success. The Red Sox as well. So I mean, I still like mixing in, Kyle Tucker in particular, but Brantley and Alvarez, but I don't think I'll get to as many full man Astro stacks as I do some of those other stacks around them.
Colorado, just you're moving on. Is there a bat maybe you like?
Trevor Story.
Okay.
I think I don't hate the idea of trying to leverage stack against Odorizzi, or at least grab a bat or two against him, because I think of the pitchers that are projected to get ownership, Odorizzi's pretty easily the worst. Like looking at guys that have at least 10% ownership right now, it's Odorizzi, Gallen, Rodriguez, Wood, Nola, Gilbert, Scherzer. Odorizzi just does not belong with those pitchers in terms of talent. I understand, again, why he's getting the ownership, and I think he deserves it because of the matchup. But, taking a shot on some combination of McMahon, Story, Blackman, Crone, Hilliard makes some sense. Story individually would be the guy that I single out. I mentioned it earlier. I've mentioned it a couple times. Typically you're not going to really buy into narratives with baseball, but he did basically say himself that he thinks he'll have a better second half because he was distracted by all the trade rumors and whether or not he was going to be traded and stuff like that. He said he had trouble blocking it out. He has a long track record of being a very good hitter. So I do think maybe you just see him do better as the year goes on. And it is a good matchup here with Odorizzi.
It's a great point that I think is under discussed as a whole, which is if you're looking for a stack that we have that's either closer to the bottom or near the bottom that has value because they're cheaper or because they're super underowned and they're going up. Now, again, all these factor in, right? You can't just randomly throw a dart, but you find the weakest, highest owned pitcher, right? And you stack against that. Even if it's one or two or three lineups in a bulk entry in a tournament. Am I reading that right, though? Like, you could pretty much get away with this. Maybe you need 8 or 9 games on a slate in order for this to truly work. Last night might be a little more difficult, Adam, but it seems like a pretty sustainable strategy to at least throw some back-end lineups in where you normally may just say, screw this, I'm not touching the Rockies.
Yeah, the way that I typically describe, like, what is going to make a stack look good for me is you're trying to like balance some combination of chances of success. So just, pure top stack percentage, leverage. So top stack, their chances of success versus how much ownership they're getting. And then also leverage you're getting against the opposing pitcher. Like all things equal, you're going to lean towards, or you're going to prefer a stack that's facing a popular pitcher versus a stack that is not, because you're trying to beat your opponents. And one of the easiest ways in baseball to beat your opponents is to take the hitters against the pitcher that they're using. So it's not saying you're just going to blindly stack against every popular pitcher, because typically pitchers are popular for a reason. But somebody like Odorizzi, not a very good pitcher. Like, yeah, he's getting ownership because the Rockies aren't good either, but there's going to be plenty of games where Odorizzi just sucks because he kind of just sucks. So, going that route, the Rockies don't have a very high chance of success, but when they have success, they're just knocking off 20% of the field right off the bat. And then on top of that, they are still, even though they don't have a very high chance of success, they're still projected for less ownership than they really deserve by, at least by a little bit. So they're not going to be, I'll be pretty upset if I look at my exposures after lock and I'm just getting like 20% Rocky stacks or something crazy. But I do think, whereas like looking at the teams around them in terms of success, the Pirates, the Indians, the Nats, I don't really want to get to the Nats much. Like Carrasco's not going to get that much ownership. And I think he's pretty good. I don't want to get to the Indians that much. Manaea's not getting ownership and I think he's good. The Rockies, I don't think Odorizzi's good, and he is getting ownership. So they're at least going to move ahead of teams like that.
All right, Nestor Cortez, Daniel Lynch, the matchup there, a little bit different as far as pricing, $1,900 on DK, separating the two for guys that are pretty much predicted to finish right there as far as 1, 2, not at the top, but in order at least on this top two, which is free for you today, the top pitcher stack. So they're both right there, one after another. The pricing is the biggest difference, and now it's just a matter about how much you like the matchup for either or both.
Yeah, I think it's pretty tough to get to either guy. Nestor Cortez has actually been good this year, and he is getting more stretched out. So on the one hand, I think that you see his numbers start to drop off at least a little bit, because that's just typically what happens as pitchers get stretched out and they go through the order one extra time, you're going to see the success come down. But at the same time, not a bad pitcher, and he has had success this year. But I have trouble paying 8,500 for him. The matchup against Kansas City is okay. The hitting conditions are very favorable for bats. And, I think it's just really tough to envision many scenarios where Cortez puts up a score at 8,500 that you really want. On the other side, a really, really dangerous matchup for Daniel Lynch. He has been better since being recalled. He was with Kansas City early in the year. He's one of their top pitching prospects. He was really, really bad. They sent him back to AAA. He's put up better numbers since he came back. So I think that there's at least some chance that this is kind of a middle of the road matchup as opposed to an absolute, gas can great matchup for the Yankees. But I'm still not really looking to take Daniel Lynch against against a good Yankees team. It is a watered down lineup. It just came out. We know there's no Anthony Rizzo, there's no Gary Sanchez. So you kind of have to navigate your way through LeMahieu, Stanton, Judge, Gallo, Voit. Then you get it a little bit easier with Odor, Higashioka, Jonathan Davis, Andrew Velasquez. A little bit weaker lineup than you would normally get here, but still a really dangerous spot. Really, really warm weather, wind blowing out in Kansas City. Still tough for me to get to Daniel Lynch.
All right, now the bats, we talked about the Yankees. They're right there at the top, just below the White Sox, who are on an absolute tear. It's really one guy who's on an absolute tear. Everybody else is just following along in Chicago. But the Yankees, again, on a 15-game slate, it's not like there is a gigantic difference in ownership. So just normally, that may be a little bit of a deterrent because the leverage doesn't necessarily benefit them. But on tonight, it's pretty much wide open. So how much Yankee stacks are you getting from 5 down to mini stacks?
Yeah, I think it'll mostly be mini stacks and one-offs because, again, like you're saying, the ownership isn't a huge deterrent, but the Yankees are pulling quite a bit. Aaron Judge, 20%, Stanton, 19%, Voit, 16.5%, LeMahieu, 14%, Higashioka, 13%. If you lump all those guys together, you're just, getting a lot of aggregate ownership. And again, I think it's still a good spot for the Yankees. The hitting conditions are good. Lynch is probably an average pitcher, and the top of this Yankees order is dangerous. But I think that maybe it's not as bad as good a spot rather as people are going to make it out to be, depending on if you buy into the adjustments that Lynch made while he was in the minors. I'm more inclined to just have a low owned stack and mix in Judge, mix in Stanton, mix in Voit. I think these are still some of the best plays on the slate. It's just more so that I don't want to be allocating half of my lineup to a bunch of guys that are 10+% owned here.
By the way, your fast talking has don't think I missed that one, Jordan. Our friend Blitz in Nashville has provided us with probably the line of the week based off of your fast tongue.
I just saw that.
Now, we're going to have to get that tongue working here because I have a show at 6 o'clock at iHeart. So we got to jam through this here. And I know you don't like to stay even a second late. All right. So let's jam as much as we can here. But look, we're not going to skip over anything along those lines as well. We're in Minnesota. This is a 10-run projected game on Odd Shopper, our sponsor. But beyond Minnesota, Chicago, and this is the one that we have to deal with from a stack standpoint that we love on our top stack, and everybody for ownership does as well. So from a pitching matchup, it's going to be pretty difficult for, I would imagine, 8,700, you're going to have to get a lot back for Dallas Keuchel. We do not have him projected high at all. And on the flip side, it's just maybe too much for Griffin Jax, even at 5,400, to not go deep in a game, despite him being super cheap.
Yeah, virtually no interest in pitching here. Keuchel has always been a better real life pitcher than fantasy pitcher. Now he's not even a particularly good real life pitcher. 8,700 is just really, really, really hard to get to. Griffin Jax has shown no signs of being anything but terrible. AAA numbers weren't great, and he's just been getting lit up in terms, at least, of expected numbers in the majors. So no real case to be made for either pitcher for me.
Bats, now, this is just like we talked about with the Yankees, right? Are you working now lesser stacks, like 2-3-man stacks with the White Sox to kind of counter even more ownership than we have with the Yankees?
Yeah, you can basically just replay what I said about the Yankees and apply it to the White Sox here. I think Eloy Jimenez is one of the best values on the slate. I like Luis Robert at 3,400. I like Tim Anderson and Jose Abreu, even though they're really expensive. The White Sox look very good. It's just, again, they're getting a ton of ownership. And so it's more so about mixing them in to lower own lineups for me. Limited sample in the majors so far for Griffin Jax, but a 307 expected ISO to righties really stands out. 141 to lefties. I expect that number to come up as you move forward as well. But Jimenez in particular, I think is just a huge priority on the slate. Really, really, really good young hitter who just isn't priced where he should be. Luis Robert, 3,400 is underpriced as well.
All right, San Fran, this is one of the LA is the Angels hosting Toronto the next game, and Seattle. This is where we start to get into West Coast night games, lower scoring projected games here. So maybe a little bit more about the pitching or end around. So let's just start in San Francisco tonight. Look at this matchup between Alex Wood, also Arizona in town here, and see if there's any interest at all on the other end with Zach Gallen.
Yeah, both pitchers here are appealing to me. Alex Wood has a pretty good matchup against Arizona. It is worth noting that we don't have their lineup yet, but their active roster actually has a 102 WRC plus against left-handed pitching and has only struck out 22.1% of the time. So maybe not quite as good a matchup as people make it out to be when they just look and see Arizona, but it's still a very good pitcher's park. It's a good pitcher in Alex Wood. The only real argument I can make against him is he's $9,800 on DraftKings. He's not a $9,800 pitcher in terms of talent. He's good, but he's not that good. He has a 25% strikeout percentage this year, 3.68 xFIP, 17.3% K minus BV percentage, more of, like an 88 to 9K pitcher, I think. So you're getting him priced for this matchup, but he's also still getting ownership at 23%. He's projected to be the third highest owned pitcher. I think he's a good play, but I do think that when I look at the really popular pitchers and I look at Scherzer, Gilbert, Wood, I think and Odorizzi. But I think Wood, I'm more inclined to get away from Wood before I get away from Gilbert or Scherzer, just because I think they are better and offer higher ceilings than Alex Wood. That being said, though, still a good spot for him. Not saying just don't play him. I just think, maybe going a little bit over-owned compared to some other options.
It doesn't look like there's much benefit to taking a risk on Arizona, but what about San Francisco with their bats?
Yeah, I do like the San Francisco bats, and I didn't mention Gallen. I'll mention him quickly.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He's only 7,100 on DraftKings. He's getting 13% ownership. So he's in that same price range as Jake Odorizzi, but he's getting a little bit less ownership. It's a dangerous matchup. The Giants have their active roster has the second highest ISO against right-handed pitching this year, the fourth highest WRC plus, but Gallen is a pretty good pitcher. I think he's a lot better than Jake Odorizzi is in terms of talent. 27.3% strikeout percentage this year, 4.1 xFIP, an elevated 10.9% walk percentage. I think a big reason that the Giants have nearly a 5 implied run total is that most of the pitchers that come in after Gallen are not going to be good. And so that kind of just drives it up. But Gallen himself is a pretty good pitcher. I think he's probably the most talented pitcher in his price range. So I do have interest in him in tournaments, even though it's a scary matchup. But then you look to the Giants bats and they're not getting much ownership here. 2.5% chance of being the top stack, about 1% aggregate ownership. There are certainly some teams above them that I would prioritize, like Tampa Bay, Cincinnati, Boston, that we've already talked about. But I do think it's a pretty high upside spot here, just given how good the hitters in the Giants lineup are. You've gotten a price drop on Brandon Belt. He's gone from like 5,400 to 4,500. So that's pretty appealing. Chris Bryant, Gallen's actually struggled with right-handed power more than left-handed power. So I think Bryant looks pretty good. Yastrzemski's cheap. I don't mind getting to some Giants, but I do think Gallen in tournaments makes sense as well.
The Angels game is that and the San Diego game that we'll get to before we get out of here. The two lowest projected totals that we have tonight for odd shoppers. So again, looking at this from a pitching matchup, how much appeal do we have here?
For the Angels and Jays?
Yeah.
Not a ton. Ross Stripling is priced up here to 9,500. The Angels are a relatively weak offense here. So if there were less pitching options on the slate, I think I can make a better case for Stripling. As is, just not a really high priority for me. Suarez, I wouldn't expect to get to at all.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so not to spend time on something that doesn't matter. Now, as far as the bats, right, like the Angels, for example, we have dead last. And as cheap as they may be, nobody's taking the bait. So I don't even know if there's an appeal here in this game. Well, we have so many other options to get to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 7-inning game, so I'm pretty much
even then,
the bats.
If you're not going to go pitching, then you just move on from the doubleheader element anyway.
Yeah, I think if I do anything here, it would be Ross Stripling, but even that's pretty low priority.
Seattle is what I meant, not San Diego. Sorry. So San Diego now, and they're hosting Miami. We talked about that last night, the Musgrove game and everything playing out from the Padres standpoint. Miami is miserable, but again, from a pitching standpoint, I don't know if you look at this and say, all right, well, it's just a matter of, Craig Stammen just getting lit up versus, doing anything on the flip side.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bullpen game for San Diego, so pretty unappealing for Miami. There's nothing really you can do with the San Diego pitching, but also not looking at all to get to Miami bats. The Padres are kind of interesting. Braxton Garrett looks like a decent pitcher, former first round pick rather for Miami. But the Padres are only getting about 2% ownership. A weakened lineup, of course, without Tatis, but still a pretty decent lineup. They sort of fall into that same category as like San Francisco, though, where they look a little bit underowned, but there's other teams that look a little bit better for me. So I could see getting to a little bit of San Diego if you're playing like 150 lineups, but they're not one of my favorite spots.
When you say a little, and I know we're winding down, we've got that Texas-Seattle game still to get to before we get out. Remember, Josh and Eric are up next for Live Before Lock. They'll answer your question, Isaiah, as well. So make sure you hit us up with a like before you leave, but you're not leaving because we have Live Before Lock coming up. With that said, actually, you know what? I completely forgot what I was even going to follow up with. So that's
something about me getting to a little bit of San Diego.
Yes. Do you see yourself getting to like 4 or 5 stacks, even if it's like 2 to 3 in a bigger tournament? Or when you talk about getting to San Diego, is this more limited?
Yeah, it's more like when I say like a little bit, we're projecting them for like 2% ownership. I wouldn't be surprised if in 150 max I get like 4% or 5%. But like they might not even be a team that I get to in 20 max, or I might get them like in 1 of 20. I definitely don't expect to get to them in 3 max. So it's kind of just like, yeah, I might be overweight, but it's not like I'm taking some crazy stand on them.
So Logan Gilbert comes in, especially for a guy that's predicted to be right there at the top, finish as a top 2 pitcher. I mean, this ownership is under 40%, just under 40%. So I don't know if you see it increasing or maybe staying as is. That could be enough of maybe that's the magic number. We get to 40 where you're like, yeah, I love Logan Gilbert, but my God, 40% of the slate's owning him.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see what I end up doing with Logan Gilbert, because I think it's a really good spot. Texas is bad. Logan Gilbert is very good so far in his rookie season. 28.2% strikeout percentage, 3.87 xFIP. I mentioned on the show with Josh that I'm a little concerned by his recent outings because there's always the risk that he's just kind of running into a rookie wall after not pitching last year. But at the same time, his fastball velocity isn't down. His plate discipline numbers, for the most part, still look good over those starts. So I still think it's a really good spot for Gilbert. What kind of trips me up is that he's $9,600. So his salary increased for the matchup against Texas. And then you still have 40% of the field saying, yeah, I'm going to go to Logan Gilbert, even though he's correctly priced. That's what makes it kind of tough. Like I can basically sacrifice like one hitter and go to Max Scherzer at lower ownership. I can go to so many other guys that are really talented, even if they're in tougher matchups, but guys like Gray, Nola, Minaya, Rodriguez, and, kind of spread ownership around there. So I think Gilbert's a little bit overowned. I also think like he's one of the best projected pitchers, and it is a good spot. So if I have a really low-owned team full of hitters around him, I'm fine just going to Logan Gilbert. But I also think that it's very reasonable to just be a little bit under the field on Gilbert and be increasing your ownership to these other really good pitchers that are low-owned.
Now, you mentioned Colby Allard before, but it's been on a much tighter slate. So as we wind down here, and again, Live Before Lock coming your way just in a matter of seconds here, is there any interest, or is maybe the slate too big to run him?
Yeah, I think the slate's a little bit too big. His salary has also come up. He was like $5K recently. He's $6,400 now. If anything, I'd take some shots on Mitch Haniger, Ty France from the Seattle side.
Now, as far as the stacks, we wind down here with the bats. Seattle is probably at the top of the bottom. There is some leverage because nobody is really owning them. And on the flip side, you look at the other stack and whether or not that there's any interest at all with Texas, who's projected even lower.
Yeah, I don't think I really end up stacking either team. I think it's more so, I like Mitch Haniger. I like Ty France. There's just so many stacks that I like more than Seattle that I don't think I get to a lot of them. And I just can't bring myself to go to Texas.
See, that's great, though, because normally I feel like we're racing through to get to a game that is like really important. And it's the last of a 15-game slate. And we're like, yes, this is the game that we should be talking about. But it worked more to our favor. So thank you, brother. I know you got a jet. I got a jet. Don't go anywhere if you're out there. Hit us up with a like. Make sure you're subscribed and stay right there for Live Before Lock. Adam's on Twitter at ShipMyMoneyDFS at Shander Show. Thanks, Jordan, and thank you all there, but don't go there.
Live. Welcome to MLB Live Before Lock. It is Tuesday, August 10th. I am Josh Engleman. I am joined by Eric Lindquist, and we are here to close it on out through a 15-game MLB slate. We got to talk about everybody. 30 teams. It's going to be fun. But let's start here. Eric, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to hear how Asheville was. That's one of my favorite places that I visited. I love that little town. It was an absolute blast when I went there, I don't know, 6-7 years ago. But how was it?
I had an exceptional time. I ate all of the food that I could possibly find. I drank all of the drinks that I could possibly find.
Good man.
And then we went camping for a couple of days, which was also pretty fun. So it was nice to be gone. It's also nice to be back. It would be nice if people hit that like button, run those likes up, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification.
Like you never left. Like you never left.
When you're good, you're good, man. When you're good, you're good. We have a lot to talk about. Luckily, we don't have to go game by game and stuff it into an hour. So we can be a little bit more freeform. But before we do anything, I do want to hit on a super chat we got a little bit earlier from Isaiah, who said, what's the best tool or article to use for a 15-game slate? So one, I appreciate the super chat. Thank you very much. Two, if we're talking baseball, the first two places that I'm going to go, I can't give just one. I'm going to the top pitchers tool. I'm going to the top stacks tool. Those two things are going to dictate every decision that I'm going to make. That will be where I'm figuring out my pitchers based on how likely they are to succeed, how much they're getting owned. Same scenario for trying to pick my stack. Do you have anything else you would recommend?
Yeah, Adam's deeper dive now is definitely something you want to be checking out and available. The guy's been the hottest MLB player on planet Earth here. We're fortunate to be able to work with the man and be able to talk with him every day about the MLB, but you can actually, well, it depends. It depends who you are. You're over it. You're just over him. It's fine. I get it. For me, it's like, oh, he keeps winning. This is fun. But I like the deeper dive. I like being able to go game by game, going through some of his thoughts more in depth. Sometimes on a show, you might gloss over something quickly, but he really puts a lot of time into that. And it's nice to have that article back.
I agree. I guess I don't want to give Adam too much credit here. You should read the deeper dive. It's a fantastic article. Do that. But, top stacks, top pitchers.
That honestly, they're better. So there's that. Yeah, it's fun.
All right. Speaking of top pitchers, that is exactly where we are going to start this show right now. Eric, who are your top pitchers for today?
Max Scherzer. I know that that's a super hot take. I'm going to a lot of Sonny Gray. I'm going to just continue to keep going down with that ship here at this time. Sonny Gray, just pain and suffering. But I think that there's a bounce back here in store after just completely. I mean, you're not getting a discount on him either at 10-3, but no. I have a feeling that ownership could come even a little bit lower than 13%. So I think for tournaments, he makes a lot of sense. Erod, I'm always going to have interest in. As dangerous as Tampa Bay can be, there's a lot of bats in that lineup that will be K-ing. And Erod was kind of a victim of a lot of negative variance earlier in the season. Just kind of all of his underlying stats look a lot better than the way he's performed on the top end of it. He's a pitcher that I think is going to get luckier as we go forward. And the K stuff has always been there. It's just a question of, can he just avoid having those walks and avoid having these long at bats that he ends up getting in the middle of where, he gets to 103 pitches in 5 innings. And I think that there's some upside for him underneath 10K. And of course, on the very bottom end, we'll get to him a little bit later here, but Aaron Ashby, somebody you got to have on your radar.
I mean, we can get to it right now if you want. I think he's a fantastic option for today. Price be damned. Obviously, you're getting to him because his price is $4,400. I believe it's 44. It's not 40. It's not 46. Is it? I'm going off the top of my head.
44. You're the guy.
He just shouldn't be priced like that. I'm not entirely sure why he is. I think he picks up a little bit of a benefit just from this game. If he were 5,400, I would still like him a lot. I'm really intrigued by his ownership. Does that look weird to you?
So I think that what's the issue with this right now is that there's really no way to evaluate a guy for DraftKings with their algorithm where it's 0.2 innings pitched in his one major league outing. It went about as bad as it can possibly go. You look at his AAA numbers, though, and 14.15 Ks per 9 over on the FanGraphs page for him. Just a guy that has crazy kind of K upside. And if there's an outing that they have like that, he basically shows up as if he were a reliever in their algorithm. And then as a result, people don't look at it. It's the same thing with Gill. And I'm guilty of that as well. Gil came in super low owned like a week and a half ago. He was 4K flat. And it seemed like every sharp had 35% plus of him. And I had like 0% and didn't even recognize that he existed. So those are the kind of things that on the bottom end on a 15 gamer can go a little bit overlooked. As a result, I'm putting in a lot more time in these slates because I'm never going to let that happen to me again. But at the same time, that's kind of the product of it, I think. So the ownership will be higher than what we have.
The chat's getting to it first. I was hoping I could get it to it before you were done. You missed your opportunity to say that you were guilty of that.
You guys are idiots. You guys are absolute donks.
I was like shaking in my chair getting ready to do it.
You were like, I got it.
I just wanted to get there before chat was able to catch up, but chat beat me to it. And now it's just going to seem like I stole it. But I promise I wanted that joke as well. I wanted that joke. It was good. Idiots. It was right there for you. I would expect you to want that too.
I wanted it for you, but you didn't get it. So yeah, it's all right. Now it's like being next into the NBA Top Shot street. You actually lose.
Any concern with Logan Gilbert's 40% ownership on DraftKings right now?
Yes, I actually do. And Logan Gilbert is a really good pitcher. I think it's just the fact that I think out of all the pitchers, we're talking about the top pitchers tool, and it's basically saying 17% chance of this dude existing, 40%. I would rather go overweight to Scherzer, just knowing the proven track record we have of him at 11K. Yes, it's a dangerous spot, but it's a watered down Philly lineup. I think that looking at Scherzer on the top end, I'm more inclined to have more of him and less of Gilbert. How do you feel about it?
Just looking at it the way that I have it coming out, I would be significantly lighter on that Gilbert ownership. Yeah. He's showing up in my sims. Let's see. Last update, under 20%. So He naturally is just a guy that I would want. I don't want to like it. He's in a great spot. Don't get me wrong. Like I understand why he's pulling that ownership, but I would be, if you told me for sure he was 40, I would rather have 15 to 20. And just start tossing it around to Sonny Gray, Sean Manaea, Erod, even in that point, 12% owned. Like Woods ownership looks fine to me. Nola scares me a little bit. More Scherzer, honestly, at 28% would be fine, considering the amount of Aaron Ashby that I'd like to have. It doesn't make going to Scherzer all that difficult. That number for Gilbert at 40% is just too big.
It's too big, and I understand Texas sucks. They are an abysmal lineup. We just got their confirmed lineup, and you get Garcia Lau. As long as you get through that little duo, Heim maybe in the 6 hole, it's just kind of easy sailing for the most part. But it's not just that I think Gilbert could have a decent game here. It's just that I just think at that ownership, you're not really getting that big of an edge. And this is we have 30 starting pitchers to be looking at here on this slate. And you're getting under a 20% chance of him finishing as a top 2 pitcher. I can get more exposure to Nola, Gray, Manaea. I can scattershot kind of everybody there. For me, Erod's my guy at flat ownership, where I'm like, he should be more than 12% owned here on this slate. And as long as he's not, that feels like just such an easy pivot for me. And people sure, Tampa Bay is a much better hitting team. Nobody's going to argue that. I'm not going to argue it. But at 1/4 of the ownership, it's just such an easy plug and play for me. If you're basically saying Gilbert's going to be 40, 45%, that just becomes something that you have to automatically be looking a little bit lighter on. And I know Alex has always talked in the past about how it's pretty easy for him to just, play the better pitchers in spots. And you can target Texas and you can target Miami as much as you want coming down the stretch here. That's going to be no problem with it. But the way I see it, like Logan Gilbert, it's not the kind of elite stuff. I would rather just have the different kind of makeup of my lineups, go down to the 4,400 number that we were just talking about a little bit earlier here. I just think that kind of a play makes more sense in tournaments, going to Ashby and kind of having all the bats up top and be able to scattershot the top stacks as well, rather than playing Scherzer, Gilbert, and being forced into the exact same teams and builds.
Yeah, we have Logan Gilbert as the second highest ranked top pitcher on the DraftKings top pitcher tool. At 17%, we've got his ownership at 39. I can't be there with that sort of aggression in a large field GPP, particularly when I've got Ashby in like 20% of my lineups and he's projected for 2.5% ownership. That one's scaring me. It just doesn't, let me be honest, just doesn't feel right. Feels like it's going to be more like 10 to 15.
Okay. You think Gilbert's going to be 10 to 15?
No, Ashby.
What? Oh, Ashby. Yeah, no, Ashby is going to be way lower owned. If you're watching this show, you should just be jamming him because he's going to go overlooked. It's just the way that it is. It's not a guy you bounced around everywhere in the industry and you look at what people are talking about, who they're talking about. Doesn't seem like somebody's getting a lot of traction, at least. Sure, if people are box score watching, you click on it, it looks really, really brutal. You could say, oh, he's a reliever, he's this, he's that. But people don't like to look, the 10 seconds it takes to go to FanGraphs and be able to look up his K per 9 on that sheet. People don't do that shit. So absolutely be jamming him.
Aaron Ashby in Steamer has a 28% K rate, projected K rate, and a 3.37 FIP.
Stupid.
No joke. No joke.
He's the best player on the slate at pitcher. He's the best play on the slate.
Absolutely. Do you like any other value arms?
Do I like? The word like is probably the wrong one to use. I think I'm willing to be taking shots on other guys. For one, I'm just taking Carlos Carrasco out of my pool. If he decides to, in 70 pitches, throw 10 Ks, I'm just going to lose and whatever. I don't really care. 10%, okay. I feel like that's paying the rake today because it's hard for me to imagine. I don't think he's going to burn anybody that plays him, but I don't think he's going to go out and have any kind of an upside that exists at going to 29 other starting pitchers for sure. So I will say that's the one guy I'm just not playing whatsoever. I think Luis Patino is another guy that we got to be talking about. And I'm surprised at his number as well. I mean, this was the guy that we had been talking about being the starlet of the Blake Snell trade, which, man, it's amazing how things change week to week and start with some guys, because holy mother of Jesus, did he pitch well the other night. Blake Snell just completely nuked that slate in the afternoon on Sunday. But yeah, I love getting to some Luis Patino. It just kind of gives you a little bit of a different build. I think the upside and just the arm talent is there. He's 21. We're going to kind of see him come into his own. And if Tampa Bay is going to be competitive down the stretch, I've said this a number of times, where I think he's going to be their potential number one coming into it. I mean, he's that kind of a pitcher. He's that kind of a difference maker. I think that in any spot, even against a very, very dangerous Boston team, I'm happy to be rolling the dice because I think he's that good.
By the way, are you concerned with any weather on the slate? Anything that you're doing with regards to weather that we should let the people know of at 6:16 p.m. Eastern time?
I'm not right now. I think that it's probably going to play clean pretty much everywhere. I think the one spot that I noticed, they were talking about a late start potential. Where was that game at? I don't even know where it went. There was one spot that was talking about a late start. Was that Oakland and Cleveland potentially, where they were looking at Tristan McKenzie, Sean Manaea? Let me see. No, everything
Detroit
looks good
and Baltimore,
to me. Detroit, Baltimore is the one. Yeah. Here we go. They're talking about a late start. It's raining there apparently right now, and Adam was talking about it here a hot second ago, but I wasn't really listening to him, so I apologize. I pulled a U. Yeah, it was great. It was enjoyable. I should probably never do that again because I don't remember what he said. Just
you're too busy reading him to listen to him.
But yeah, that's exactly it. I'm living back in the prehistoric days. I like pen to paper. I like traditional things. You get your little notebook, you live your life, you do your things. It's fine.
I got my notebook right here, but it usually just ends up having like my grocery list on it.
So there's a notes app for that too, but I digress.
I'm a weird one with wanting to, I don't like using the notes app. I use the notes app very periodically, but I do have a couple good notes. I'm going to pull this up. Sometimes I get hit with random stuff.
I'm so excited. This could go anywhere.
One of the notes that I have here is, here it is. This one's good. It's more fun to picture Sean Parker as Justin Timberlake. That is a note in my phone.
This is like the Notebook. Well, not the Notebook, the movie. This is like the janitor's notebook from Billy Madison, where he's just like, Miss Lippy's car is green. Yeah. It's basically what we're watching live. Oh,
how about, I want to lick your body clean like a kitty cat.
What?
That's a note in there.
If anybody from chat knows what that's poetry? Feel free to drop it in.
Yes. I didn't want to forget it.
I want to lick you like clean like a kitty? What?
Yes. I want to lick your body clean like a kitty cat. Okay. What do you think? Pretty good, right?
I'm like, now I'm doing the J.R. Smith gif.
I have one in Google Keep. I don't know if I don't even have the app on here. Some quote from my father-in-law, something about somebody being ugly as a tub of assholes or something like that. That was really good. Anyway.
Oh my God. You're like Michelangelo. You walk around with a notebook and you just put, except for instead of inventing like airplanes before they're invented, you're writing haikus and stuff about weirdness. It's cool. It's cool.
Anyway, schedule for the rest of the night. This is it. And it seems like I'm probably running it into the ground too. So luckily for that, we don't have anything coming up.
Hit that subscribe button, everybody.
Yes. Do hit the like button. If you like my notes app, Butthole Jenkins nails it. Brooklyn 99. MLB top pitchers tool, something we've referenced already, something we just touched on. It is free today. So everything that we just talked about from a pitching perspective, you can go check it out on the website. Also, PGA top golfers tool, free as well for the Wyndham this week. Who wins the Wyndham?
Not Webb
not
Simpson,
Sam Burns,
I hope.
right?
Not Sam Burns. Did you just bring up Sam Burns? Did you?
My bad.
Dude, it's way too soon. Way too soon. Somebody who costs you, I mean, I did the math on it, and it's a scary number about how much money that guy cost me with the lip out there. It was
it was the only thing I knew that really happened in sports for the past like 7 days. I saw your quote tweet of the putt lipping out. I didn't really know much of the context, but I saw it anyway.
Did you ask Ben about it?
We talked about it a little bit today before we recorded our PGA video.
It was my gigantic stance, highest owned golfer, my everything. And I mean, obviously it worked out well for DFS, but a W is very, very different result in a couple of the single entry tournaments. And then obviously the betting card, it's surprising that I'm here right now. We'll put it that way.
Fair enough. Well, let's transition from, there we go. Cream in Premium Baseball Chat dropped the GIF of my quote into chat if you want to see that. But let's talk a little bit about stacks. Who is your top stack for today?
My top stack projected would be the White Sox for sure, but they're just coming in crazy high owned. And I'm actually playing quite a bit on FanDuel today. I'm kind of mixing it up. I thought it seemed like a pretty fun FanDuel slate. You don't have to get I like both sites here for today, but I'm playing more FanDuel than I normally do for baseball for sure. And I think the White Sox are just coming in a little bit too high owned. So I'm kind of hitting the e-brake on that, cutting that and trimming that in half, but still in a really good spot. Obviously the top stack loves them, but the ownership is just absolutely there in a ridiculous way. The team that I'm going to the most right now was St. Louis. I feel like they're like one of the more popular or one of the more positively leveraged teams to be getting to. Yeah. It just doesn't feel like anybody's going to be going there. And I don't know why, because Stephen Brault's terrible. It's a team full of righties. Like this just seems to set up really nicely. And Tyler O'Neill not being there, sure, that hurts quite a bit. But Harrison Bader, Paul DeJong, 1 through 7, I do not mind getting to anybody there. Just all these righties are going to just destroy Stephen Brault. And it's 80 plus degrees there in Pittsburgh today. I think they're coming in a little bit overlooked. And so I'm kind of making them one of my bigger stands over on FanDuel today.
I'm totally with you. They are my number 2 stack on DraftKings, number 5 on FanDuel. And that's just an overall ranking. They're actually 9th in leverage. So combining those two, that's my favorite option to get to if I'm looking at upside and ownership on FanDuel. On DraftKings, they're pulling a little bit more ownership. So I think they're sort of neutrally owned in my data, but still my number 2. Like I would rather get to the Cardinals than the White Sox. Just given the White Sox ownership right now, I don't have them all that separate. So I'm with you on the Cardinals. I like it.
All right. Well, I didn't expect you to be on board with it right away. I like the Dodgers against Nola, but the ownership's starting to get there. It's at least flat. It was positively leveraged earlier, so I'm kind of hitting. I'm hitting eject on that one now. Before it was a lot lower than that earlier in the afternoon when I started everything. Cincinnati, another team. I mean, we can go down the line. For me, it's really playing a lot of the ownership game. I do not want the White Sox to be the make or break spot for me, but it seems like on FanDuel, that's going to be very important that the White Sox and Detroit specifically, and I talk about Detroit, I think about every slate where I just don't want to play bad teams that are coming in as value. And I understand Keegan Aiken and a ballpark going into Baltimore is a huge upgrade. And Grossman leading off, I think, is the one bat that I'm probably going to make sure I still get to some. Eric Haas is 5.4K, so I don't really need to do that on DK anymore. But specifically on FanDuel, like both of those teams. I mean, that's basically almost 30% of the field going to those stacks. Just being lighter on those, I feel like gives you a nice leg up, being able to kind of scatter shot with these other teams that you like. Oh, Houston. I'm in love with Houston today too. Specifically getting to a lot of those lefties against John Gray here in Houston. John Gray is not the same pitcher we've had once upon a time from him here, pitching a little bit more to contact, under a 22% K percentage on the season. I really like getting to those lefties. Kyle Tucker, Yordan Alvarez, Carlos Correa, kind of even that little 3-man in 4 through 6 really sticks out to me.
Teams that I'm looking at that I think are going a bit underowned: Red Sox, Padres. You mentioned the Reds before. The Rays, I think, are going quite a bit underowned. Tough spot. Braves, they have taken a bit of a climb in my data since earlier this morning. Those are the teams that I'd be looking to get over the field on, teams that aren't pulling as much ownership as I was totally expecting. Right now, White Sox, Yankees, A's, Tigers, they are the better stacks. They are highly ranked stacks, not necessarily teams I want to go crazy on just because of the ownership, in particular the White Sox on FanDuel, where if you're in a large field contest, I don't know how you justify that. If they go off, fine. There's 30 teams today. If you want to be really accurate, there's 26. Do you have any interest on DraftKings in any of the 7-inning games?
No, I've just kind of removed them. Could you play Shohei Ohtani? Somebody brought that earlier up in chat. I mean, for me, you can't be paying that kind of a tag for a guy who's going to get 2.5 at bats. Like, it just feels a little ludicrous to me that I just give me the field. Give me the rest of the groupings that have, 4 to 5 at bats. Just seems like the upside's just so capped when you're only at a 7-inning game, and he's the home team. If they're up, he only plays 6 innings.
He showed up in my Sims 2% of the time. That's not going to be nearly enough to solo him out in this sort of spot. It's just not worth it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If they want to go crazy and he's going to hit 3 dongs today in a 7-inning game, like, kudos. What can we do about something like that? Nothing.
Not a thing.
Play the Red Sox, people. That's my call for today.
Okay. I don't.
No ownership. Too good. I'm willing to bet on talent.
I like both sides of it. Then Luis Patino. I mean, he's just such a good pitcher, but there's definitely going to be some growing pains for any 21-year-old pitcher in the big leagues. Nobody comes in and hits the ground running. It's very, very rare you get a Walker Buehler, and even Walker Buehler early in his Dodger tenure had some blow up spots. Like, it's just going to always happen. They figure out how to pitch at the next level, and there's some growing pains. And Luis Patino, 218 expected batting average, but a 25% K percentage. I mean, it just seems like he's a very good pitcher that this is just too good of an offense to come in this low owned for sure.
I have Boston and Tampa as my number 1 and number 2 leverage stacks. They are 1st and 5th or something like that in the top stacks tool. So we're looking at it in the same way. 2 teams that I think getting to bats is worth it, just given the makeup of the slate. Any other stacks you want to touch on?
I mean, we could go on for a while here with a couple of these. San Francisco. Yeah. So San Francisco has some crazy numbers. Without looking, tell me San Francisco's ISO up against righties this season.
I'm not looking, I promise.
Okay.
Let's go 169.
201. So San Francisco can absolutely rake. And Zach Gallen is getting a little bit of ownership on both sites right now. It was a little bit higher earlier in the day. It's kind of tempered off to like 13%. And Zach Gallen going forward is a very, very good pitcher. I like him. I think he's one of the few assets that Arizona actually has that they can make work for some things. I mean, he was a cast off from Miami once upon a time, and he wasn't good enough to crack Miami's rotation, I suppose. And Miami's got a sneaky good rotation. I don't think there's any question about that. There's a walk problem that exists for him. And you look at the top of this lineup here for San Francisco. I just think that there's a lot of power potential, but they're the number 1 team up against right-handed pitching on the season. I understand it's a bad ballpark. I understand that there's a lot more intriguing spots to go to, but so long as San Francisco is coming in way underowned here. I mean, they're going to always be underowned at home here, but we're getting nearly 2% of leverage over on FanDuel here. I think San Francisco, especially, adding Chris Bryant into the top of that order is a huge addition. And whether it's Lamonte Wade, Brandon Belt, Brandon Crawford, I mean, these guys have just been not even sneaky good. They just have been flat out good this entire season. So the number 1 team up against right-handed pitching on the season, I'm going to get to some San Francisco.
I like it. They're my number 6 leverage team. I'd be happy to get there. I just have a couple leverage stacks ahead of them. So I don't know if I would ultimately get there because I have other teams highly ranked, but again, they are my 6th ranked leverage stack. Baltimore and Detroit officially starting a bit late. They are delayed. Don't think it's anything you're going to have to worry about as of right now. Wouldn't make any changes based on that information. Best I could tell you guys.
Yeah, same here. It's not something you need to be freaking out about here right now. We've got 35 minutes here. We've got Loco that's coming in and out of chat. He's in the premium Slack. He's constantly keeping us updated. If there's something where they're talking about it being postponed, I think we're going to know sooner rather than later. Baltimore, well, I don't want to jinx it, so I don't even want to say it, but I think we're going to be all right here.
Fair enough. Just in case we're not, we have plenty of information at the website that you could check out. And you can do that by signing up using the promo code MLB Live Before Lock. One gigantic word. You get 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus. And that's everything, everybody. It's not just baseball, even though that's how it's written in the title. You get access to all of the content that exists. NFL, MLB, PGA, NASCAR, MMA, tennis, soccer coming back this weekend. Cannot wait. Go Liverpool. Esports. Yeah. We have everything for you. Use the promo code that the man behind the virtual glass, Jordan Klein, has just put up on the screen. MLB Live Before Lock. One big word, 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus. Now, I believe it is time for us to start taking a look at individual positions. And this one's not going to be all that important for FanDuel to start. But how do you feel about the catcher spot today? Clearly, catcher, not super interesting. Here's a question for you. Should FanDuel just simply have a catcher option?
Yes. The catcher first base thing, it was great. It was actually great before catchers started having the ability to hit again. And now there's a couple, whether it's Mitch Garver, Eric Haas, Sean Murphy, even for Oakland, Will Smith for sure of the Dodgers. I just think that there's enough guys where I think having a catcher position is more viable now. And I think just having a catcher and then first base, having another position in there, I think that would definitely open up. There seems like there's a lot more overlap on FanDuel than there's been before. Now, this is a 15-gamer, and I'm not so worried about it. But on a 4 or 5 game slate, it's really been more difficult to get different.
At catcher for me, I've got 3 guys at the top on DraftKings. There's not a lot of separation here right now. Mitch Garver, Eric Haas, Yadier Molina. I would say Molina is the guy that's I would be targeting as a one-off. He's pulling significantly less ownership than anybody else. Kyle Higashioka would be my sort of individual fade. He's pulling more ownership than I think that he should. Do you have any catchers standing out?
I think that those were all viable here. Sean Murphy was my number 1, 3,700 batting 6th here going up against Cleveland. There was some weather concern there a little bit earlier. I have no problem with it too. James McCann also. Espino giving up a bunch of righty power here on the season. He's in the 8 hole there, 3,400. I have a little bit of James McCann as well. Popped up more than I would want James McCann to pop up earlier in the day. So I think having a little bit of him isn't the worst thing.
Okay. On to first base, and we could tackle this whether that's FanDuel or DraftKings now. Seems a little bit better. On DK, we've got a few guys in double digits. FanDuel in particular, driving a lot of ownership here. Scope, Olsen, Jose Abreu, all 16, 18, 20%. On DK, Olsen, DJ LeMahieu, Pete Alonso, Jose Abreu, Scope again, all pulling double digits. Olsen and LeMahieu are my only 2 double-digit guys, so I think that they are properly owned. I'd be dodging Luke Voit at 14% pretty aggressively. My highest leverage guys are going to be Max Muncy and Freddie Freeman, and those are 2 guys that I'll never have a problem rostering.
Yeah, Peter Alonso for me. So if I'm going to like James McCann from the right side, I better like Pete Alonso. He's been really bad of late. I don't really buy into it. He's going to long-term continue to be a great power hitter. I love targeting him here in this spot. So I'm going to have an absolute ton of him over on DK. Another guy that I'm going to quite a bit, Paul Goldschmidt. So I think 5,100 for him, batting 3rd. Talked about the reason that we like the Cardinals so much going up against Brault. Another guy that's kind of jumping up for me. I'm only playing 20 lineups over on DK tonight. So more focusing actually weirdly enough, more on FanDuel. So Paul Goldschmidt going to be at the top of my board for DK.
Okay. FanDuel top guy for me is not at all what I was ever going to be expecting, but Miguel Cabrera. So hopefully he's on HGH starting yesterday. That would help.
Wow.
He's my number one guy relative to ownership.
It's a normal thing to say. Normal.
Yeah. That's
what year is it?
Yeah, I feel like when I got into the hot tub in my house when I was in Asheville, it was a hot tub time machine. I went back to Miguel Cabrera being good.
Wow. Yeah, it's a weird time to be alive right now. 2021 has a lot of unexpected things. The Giants are going back in time, and Miguel Cabrera joined them.
If you can get into a hot tub time machine, what year would you want to go back to?
Oh,
or era, if you just want to be broad.
Question. Oh, I love the Revolutionary War. I absolutely love it. So I mean, I don't know if I would want to get in the middle of that. I mean, but Woodstock, I think Jimi Hendrix would be up there for me musically. I think Revolutionary War, definitely. I loved that Turn show that was on AMC once upon a time, and I felt like nobody watched it, but I absolutely loved it. Okay. What would you pick? I can't even think beyond that right now.
So
literally, Jesus, we could go to 0 AD, Jordan Klein.
So it obviously is going to suck no matter where you go. Like you forget about the amenities that you like air conditioning or, traveling via car or plane instead of horseback and carriage. So I would probably
dysentery.
Yeah. Like I don't want to get diarrhea and die.
Okay.
Like
it's fair,
which is a thing. So I would probably do it exactly like he did in Hot Tub Time Machine and go back to like whatever the 70s or the 80s and create Google in my name or something like that and just rip off everything else. I would basically be the Biff of Back to the Future.
Yeah, I was going to say, instead of an almanac, it's a computer. And here's the thing, though. You are kind of a wizard of the spreadsheets and the computer. I feel like you more than myself for sure could go back in time and really screw some stuff up to make sure you were a billionaire. Like for me, I feel like I'd go back in time and do weird shit like hang out in the Revolutionary War and die. Like that's what I would do.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't want the fame. I would just want the money. So like buying Apple shares when it was in the toilet and like shorting Enron or something like that. I would do little things to just build up enough money and then just go live a life where no one bothers me.
Yeah. Okay. But no, there's so many follow-up questions to that, but I think that's probably the right answer. I think, going to 1776, less appealing by the second as I'm thinking about it. Probably not the greatest situation in Virginia right about then.
If you could somehow bring like an automatic weapon or something where you're just, you're like the Rambo of it all.
You were right with the AC unit. I think you have to bring an AC unit or you're just toast. You're done.
Yeah, unless the hot tub time machine takes me directly to like San Diego or something where I don't have to worry about like problematic weather. If I get dropped off in North Carolina and it's 95 degrees with a heat index of 110, I'm going to get right back in that hot tub and hope that it'll shoot me back to 2021.
Good call.
Second baseman. Who stands out at the top of your second base list for today?
I don't even really know what we're doing here anymore. So Whit Merrifield, I love going up against it. We didn't even talk about this Kansas City game. So the Yankees are getting a ton of exposure. I think on the KC side of it as well, getting a little bit of positive leverage over on FD today. Whit Merrifield's been bad. Like there's no way around it. But I think that this is a good spot against Nestor Cortez. It was good young pitcher here for the Yankees. But I just like getting to some Whit in this spot. I like getting to a lot of these KC bats. It's cheap on the back half of it. Up and down this entire lineup, 1 through 5 specifically, though. Even Hunter Dozier there in the 7-hole, Michael Taylor in the 8-hole. But give me some Whit Merrifield leading off there.
Tommy Edman, my highest ranked second baseman on FanDuel right now. And that is just legitimately overall 1 percentage point ahead of Jonathan Scope. Same scenario on DraftKings, but he's pulling a little bit more ownership. Same for LeMahieu. I think both guys are essentially properly owned. The guy that I'm looking at most, Kike Hernandez, 4,700, just 2% ownership. I have him in the optimal 8% of the time. So a very interesting one-off to me. Similar guys, Ozzie Albies, Rougned Odor, guys that just aren't pulling all that much ownership that I think could pop a little bit in large field if you're looking for a one-off.
Absolutely. I love all those calls as well. For me, I have Tommy Edman. I should have said that. That would be the right way of saying it. And he's in my cash lineup on DK. Like I played a little bit of cash over on DK just to help out some people in Slack chat that we were going back and forth in premium Slack. So wanted to throw it out there. Tommy Edman, love that play.
And I think that Ramon Urias is significantly overrated. Over-owned, I guess I should say, but also overrated in this particular sense. One more position to hit before we do another read. That would be third base. Who is your number one third baseman for today?
Click back over to it here. Aledmys Diaz was my number one, another guy who's in my cash lineup, but that's just a price play, $3K up against John Gray. Not somebody I'm specifically targeting. I just think third base is one of the weaker positions than I can remember in recent years. My highest owned in tournaments here, Nolan Arenado. I don't think that's surprising based on everything else I said. JD Davis, 3,300 as well. Absolutely love getting to both of them. Yohan Moncada, please don't kill me.
For real. I think he's massively overowned. Would be a guy that I'd be trying to dodge there. Fine in cash games, clearly. But not necessarily my idea of a great one-off GPP play, depending on what the rest of you, if you've got a low-owned stack and, you're going to one of the low-owned pitchers, then by all means. But for me, Devers is at the top of the list on both sites. On FanDuel, I have him pretty significantly underowned. Same sort of story on DraftKings. Machado is my number 2, also underowned. I think it's really easy on DK to find guys that aren't pulling enough ownership that are high-end bats. The Devers, the Machados, Arenado, as you mentioned before. Odor, again, I'll mention him now at third base, pulling 1% ownership. That's a chance that I'm willing to take. Yandy Diaz, 1% ownership. I'd be willing to take shots on guys like that as one-offs.
Somebody said, who shot Eric Lindquist, Aaron Burr? How does a bastard orphan son of... No, we can't do that. I don't think we have the rights.
It would be kind of crazy to just pop in and mow down a bunch of bad guys. Be like the new hero.
It would be next level. You would be the new George Washington. Josh Engleman, George Washington. There has to be some kind of a gif we can do over there, Jordan Klein. Put him on Rushmore. Put the man on Rushmore.
Speaking of George Washington, have you seen America, the Motion Picture on Netflix?
I have not.
Highly recommended if you do like cartoons. Okay. Channing Tatum is the voice of George Washington. It is not factually accurate to the times. So both he and Abraham Lincoln are friends at the start of this. Everything's all crossed up. Jason Mantzoukas is Sam Adams. Let's see who else is pretty interesting. Andy Samberg is the voice of Benedict Arnold. George Washington has chainsaws for hands for battles, so that's pretty fun. You guys should watch this. Really, really good.
All right, done. I have nothing else to watch. I feel like I have watched everything. I've started digging into White Lotus now on HBO Max. That's how far down the list I have gone, where there's nothing else to watch. So
how far in are you on that?
All the way. I've watched every episode.
Okay, I think I might be one behind.
Okay,
I don't understand the show at all. Nothing happens in every single episode. The only thing that I want to do is keep looking at. I think it's
Alexander Daddario,
or Connie Britton's daughter in the show,
or Connie Britton. Connie Britton is a freaking smoke show. I mean, outrageous how hot
Tammy
she
Taylor
continues
baby
to be. Oh man, just absurd. Sorry, that was a necessary aside. Yeah, so just thank you God for all the women in that show.
Yes, but no thank you to whoever's writing it, because I find it to be awful and I'm getting forced to see it. So
yeah. That one, the guy who's the main dude, he just bugs me, but that's his job. He's supposed to be the most annoying dude on planet Earth. And
Alexander Daddario's guy, or
Alexander Daddario's guy.
I like him. I think he's been in the right pretty much the entire time, except for flirting with the girls. He should be mad that he didn't get the correct room. They did pay for that room. I know that he's harping on it, but he has been wronged in this scenario, and that guy has done nothing to fix it. It would irritate me as well. I get it. I get where he's coming from.
Look at you. You are the anti-hero of Awesemo.com. That's what we just found out.
Is that what?
No,
is
you're
he
correct.
Doing
You're correct.
Wrong?
You're right. No, he's not doing anything wrong. The problem is that he is not self-aware, because he's been grown up in this environment where everything is perfect and everything is a certain way, and he can't deal with any adversity whatsoever in a normal manner.
Yeah, I'd be a lot happier if Alexander Daddario was with me. I would hopefully find more happiness in life just in general.
Yeah, your wife. I love that she's on speaker right now, right? You're hearing me through the speaker of your
She
computer?
would say the same thing about her.
Oh, okay, that's fair.
Her eyes are fantastic to her. So,
oh, dude, just those witch eyes, they're fantastic. Probably number one on the old hall pass list. Like, is there a number two? I don't think there's a number two.
Rachel McAdams is one for me.
Interesting. Rachel McAdams. I could see that. She's just like, she's kind of the chick that you want to go get a beer with more than anything. Like, I feel like she would be awesome in like a New England bar, just hanging out, drinking, talking sports. I feel like I've heard she's cool like that. So I would definitely be down with that.
I'd love to find out. We don't have any information on that.
I live in Los Angeles. We'll see what I could do. Yeah. Just have her pick you up from the airport.
I don't have any information on how to make that happen, but I do have information on how to let you guys make just a little bit more money while you're trying to bet on sports. And that would be by using Odds Shopper, because you don't want to miss out on better lines. If you can get a better line, you should do that. Don't leave small edges on the table. Go to oddshopper.com to check it out. You can check out our player props, which will get graded out for expected ROI, expected win percentage. It's just the way that you should do it. If you're just going to one sports book and clicking bet without looking around to find out if there's a better line for you, you're making a mistake and you're leaving money on the table. Don't do that. Use oddshopper.com. Jordan's got it pulled up on the screen right now, sorting through all the baseball games, or at least that's what he was doing 15 seconds ago in the YouTube video that I'm looking at. It's hard to keep track of all these things at the same time. But either way, go to oddshopper.com and check it all out. Now, is a 6 at best.
I started timing them out. I couldn't deal with it. It was slanderous. That's timeouts. That's timeout worthy. If you want to come at chat and you want to have a take. But saying she's a 6 is timeout worthy. I'm sorry. Think about what you've done for 300 seconds and come back to me soon. Come back to me later.
Walk down the street one day and just put tally marks for the amount of people that you see that are better looking than she is. Just do that.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like a
hold up fingers instead. You won't fill a hand.
6.
If that's a 6, apparently there are negative numbers.
Yeah, and that's why we got rid of their insolence for at least 5 minutes. I can't do it. It was treasonous.
She's a 6, what are we?
I mean, I'm a negative 4.8 in that regard. Then there's that. And I got a fresh haircut. I was feeling all fly and stuff. And yeah, no, Alexander Daddario, put her next to you. It's over. It's not real life. Not real
Jim
life.
Jeffries, by the way, has a great bit on like the scale of looks that I highly recommend everybody check out. He calls himself a 5, talks about being with an 8, also talks about being with a 3, and the way that those things can make you feel. Let's talk shortstops, though.
Let's do that.
Who is your favorite shortstop on this slate?
Oh, God, I guess I have to pull it back up here. I was just getting to a bunch of Anthony Alford. He's 2K over on FanDuel, I suppose. Pittsburgh going up against J Happ. I don't mind that. We'll get to that a little bit later here. I guess I should talk about shortstop. That was me stalling. All right, Tim Anderson was at the top of the board, but I'm just not going to do it. I'm just not going to be there in a meaningful way for any of these White Sox. Carlos Correa, I got to a bunch of going up against John Gray, that 4 through 6, as I said, getting to a lot of 3-mans of that here for Houston. Paul DeYoung as well in the 7-hole, 3,600, starting to show spurts. I mean, he's been such a weird guy to get a gauge on, considering, I mean, the hard hits are just way down on him. Don't know what's going on, but getting to a little bit of him as well. And then just in kind of your one-off category as well, Brandon Crawford, I love getting to him on just about every single slate against any righty.
Tim Anderson at the top of the board, obviously heavily owned on FanDuel. No problem using that as your cash game shortstop, but I don't love it in GPPs. Highest ranked guy that I have is Xander Bogaerts. And now I have to shout out Anthony Davis with the big time super chat. Rachel McAdams, also his number 1. And that is why I am the GOAT. I completely agree with her being number 1. I don't necessarily agree that I am the GOAT, but I'll take it in this one. And T McBee, if she's a 6, if that's a 6, move wherever that guy lives.
Who said 6? I seriously want to know where you live.
Yeah. Like
so good.
More than 1.
Yeah. was going to say, we'll move there for sure. We would just automatically, it's like going to Spain, I think, or something like that, where it's just like, where are we? This can't be real.
All right, let's close out the individual positions with a big one. Outfield, where there are 107 potential outfielders to roster on DraftKings today. Or FanDuel. Well, there's less on FanDuel. There's 96. Feel free to let me know however many you would like to roster for today. Who are your go-to outfielders?
I mean, I have a zillion of them at this position, and I think doing a scatter shot is awfully enticing. I think Nelson Cruz against any lefty. I talked about how much I like Erod. Well, I like Nelson Cruz a little bit more all the time. Against any lefty, he's been doing it for 2 decades, basically, at this point. So Nelson Cruz under 5K against a lefty, you need to be clicking that button and getting over the field on 5% that he's coming in. Franmil Reyes as well as under 1%, 5,700, a complete pay up to be contrarian, but money is no issue if you're playing a $4,400 pitcher. So I'm getting to more of these upper edge outfielders. I have a ton of Franmil Reyes compared to the field. I mean, 12% is 24x the field of what we have right now. So definitely clicking on that name. We didn't even talk about not Austin Meadows, Yordan Alvarez, Kyle Tucker. I guess I brought them up here a number of times, but Kyle Tucker specifically is just underowned every single slate. The guy has how many home runs do you think Kyle Tucker has on the season? This is fun trivia. These are just fun times for me.
12?
He has 21 homers out of the 6 hole for Houston. And
by the way, I meant that. I'm dyslexic when I speak.
You meant 21?
Yes.
Did you really? Oh, there you go. I'll give it to you. I don't know if you're being sarcastic or not, so I'm going to just allow it, and we're going to move on. 21 homers for Kyle Tucker on the season out of the 6 hole. I feel like he goes way underowned every single slate. And Yordan Alvarez, as good of a hitter as he is, and as I thought he would be coming into the league, Kyle Tucker, 566 expected slugging, 48.9% hard hit percentage, 17.4 degree launch angle, average launch angle on that. The guy is going up there and he does not get shorted. Only an 8.7% walk rate, doesn't miss either, 16.7% K percentage. I feel like he's a better play than Yordan Alvarez pretty much every slate because of that.
Top outfielder for me on DraftKings, Robbie Grossman, in terms of guys that I would be over the field on. I think Aaron Judge is pulling 20% ownership in that. While that looks fine, that might be a little too high on a slate like this. So you can pick up guys that aren't pulling all that much ownership. Tommy Pham, 1% owned right now. Kike, again, 2% owned. I don't mind going to like Eloy or Giancarlo Stanton as one-offs. Just be aware of what's in the rest of your lineup. That's really important. Most over-owned for me right now, though, Adam Engel.
Okay. Yeah. Adam Engel, I love, just in terms of, you're not going to see a lot of him going forward, which is just crazy because he's been so good for the White Sox. And there's just nowhere to put him here now with Eloy back, with Robert back. It's just ridiculous how stacked that outfield is. I like him as a play, but just in my cash lineup, and I'm moving on with my day.
Now we are at the fun part of this show. It is time to pick your dong. Who will hit a home run today on today's slate?
Kyle Tucker will hit a home run on this slate. I've already kind of made him my stand in a lot of spots. So I'm going to call 2 of them for him out of the 6 hole. That's how confident I feel about that against John Gray.
Let's see where I have Tucker 43rd today out of 256.
Oh, there's 256 outfielders.
No. Sorry. This isn't just outfield. This is everywhere.
Oh, gotcha.
Any position whatsoever that could hit a home run.
Okay. Well, I'm all right with that at the ownership. It looks like he's going to come in with.
Okay. Let's see. Who do I want? Who's not pulling a ton of ownership? I mean, Nelson Cruz is less than 5% owned. He ranks pretty highly for me. I've never had a problem taking Nelson Cruz in a home run contest. That's for sure.
It's a good point.
Let's do this one. Unowned today on DraftKings. 1% at best. He is my number 9 in my home run model. I'm going Bryce Harper.
Wow. All right. I have no problem with it. I mean, the guy's been outrageous, and you're not going to get a lower owned dude of a guy with just as much power and ridiculousness as he's had here, going up against the most owned pitcher on the slate, or the best pitcher on the slate, should I say. I don't know if him or Gilbert will win it out on DK. I have no problem with it. Max Scherzer, we know, has a little bit of a fly ball issue once in a while. It shows up and it pops up. So I don't mind that whatsoever.
Yeah, if this was just like get a hit, then I probably wouldn't be all that excited about it. But, Scherzer can fan 12 and give up 2 solo shots. So there we go. That's the pick. Bryce Harper, dong today at no ownership whatsoever.
Love it.
Well, we've made it through top pitchers. We've made it through top stacks. We made it through each individual position, and we've made some home run picks. We have a lot of time left, actually. And we went on some serious tangents.
We did. And you know what? I'm not really that sad about it. I think that this is people don't just come here. There are 30 teams to play on this slate. MLB is I'm just basically going through the ownerships. I'm copying them over into the Excel spreadsheet. I'm trying to paste them and try to get all my players lined up the way that I want to here. It's such a joy. It's actually easier on FanDuel, which is why I'm doing this on this slate today. I think just a little bit easier, one less position to have to worry about, and only one pitcher that you really need to focus a bunch on. But I've had fun. I think everybody else has had fun too. There's no problem with it. It's Tuesday. It's middle of the season here. Also, let's talk NBA for a second. Dennis Schroeder. Like, what do you do?
Did he sign the non-taxpayer mid-level or the taxpayer mid-level?
$84 million last year with the Lakers. Turned down 4 years, $84 million or whatever that was, and basically scraping by the min there. What do you think about such things? I would kill my agent, I think.
I want to know if that offer was legitimately real, because it seems mind-boggling to me that you would turn that down.
Yeah. Who's giving you the advice to say, no, we can't do that. We got to wait out for more.
Like, look, you want to say like, okay, maybe I could have squeezed out like an extra $4 million. I don't think that's how that works.
I don't think so either.
Check Slack.
Oh, okay. Let me check it here. Sorry, I wasn't getting Slack notifications here. Loco. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Mets update. Thunderstorms. Starting pitchers not safe if they start on time. So let's think about that for a second.
Okay. I didn't want to play Carrasco anyway. I'll let everybody else do that.
Yeah. Is that one gonna matter all that much to you?
I mean, I love the Mets. I love getting to the bats there. But if we're talking starting pitchers specifically, but PD risk being 35%, that's something. That's a large number. And yeah, you have risk reward on a 30-game slate. I'm not willing to say, oh, I need to have this team, because I think they'll still be owned. I don't think people are going to necessarily hit eject on that right now with 9 minutes left. Like, they're still going to have some ownership. Just make sure that you're not playing like one-offs of some of these dudes. Like Pete Alonso, though, it's weird because 4,200, I was getting a lot of him before. I mean, if there's that much risk to it, I just don't see where that's at right now. I didn't see anybody bring that up. Yeah. It's going to miss north of Milwaukee.
Yeah, I'm checking it out now. Rain in Milwaukee and Chicago also looks like it's happening, but that is super duper. Well, it's relevant in one regard, but that's the only regard, and that would be for our boy, our low-owned extraordinaire, Aaron Ashby.
Oh man, well this is something, because I'm going to kind of take him down a tiny bit. I'm still going to have some stacks. I mean, there's no way around it. I think you still want to be stacking them up here. But yeah, I'd rather just inherit all the risk with it. Yeah, I just don't think we need to play one-offs now. I was going to play a lot of one-offs of Pete Alonso here. I mean, 4,200 for a guy with that kind of power, 24 homers on the season, 808 OPS. That made a lot of sense to me. But now I just would rather take some of the field here, because he's going to be the highest owned out of all of those bats. I'm just going to stack it up or leave it alone.
YouTube chat. Premium Slack. If you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in right now. We've got 7 minutes to go, and we just crested 200 likes, but I think like 250 is probably in the cards. So hit that thumbs up if you haven't done it already. Subscribe to this channel. Subscribe to Awesemo Odds. Subscribe to Awesemo Fantasy Football. We are cranking out so much content right now. You don't want to miss it. Make sure you're subscribing across the board. Dennis Schroeder has announced he will sign with the Celtics for the $5.9 million taxpayer mid-level exception.
Unreal. Unbelievable.
So that's wild.
I feel bad for him, actually. I just kind of flat out feel bad for him.
I mean, would you really want to go to the Celtics in this scenario?
No.
Like the last time that the Celtics had a guy that was looking to get a pretty giant contract, they broke him completely, and now he doesn't play in the NBA any longer.
Go to like Orlando. Go to some wasteland and try to make money. Like Dennis Schroeder, it's just such a weird thing for me. It's not really the piece that I think the Celtics need. I don't think that makes them that much better whatsoever. And I just feel bad for the kid because I thought he was going to make a ton of money coming off of that really good year in OKC. But we see now that Chris Paul, probably the impetus for players playing a little bit better and a little bit over their heads.
Let's see what I have him valued at, because I actually do have that ready to go. Questions, get them in here too, by the way. So Dennis Schroeder to the Celtics. Wow, that is nuts.
Did you not see that earlier in the day?
It just popped 3 minutes ago from Woj.
Oh, sick. Okay. I just saw that it was something that was like getting worked.
Yeah. So I saw that it was in the
know.
cards, but he didn't want to he wanted a 2-year deal. Boston didn't want to hard cap themselves. And he was also looking for the non-taxpayer mid-level, which would have been $9.5 million.
Wow.
If he plays 68 games at 28 minutes a game, I have him worth about 4 wins, which is like 10 million a year. So like, it's a deal for the Celtics. Schroeder should, I also would have been screaming from the rooftops at Dennis Schroeder to take the bag and run, however long ago that was, but
it was like the one day before LeBron stepped in the gym and he was like, nope, this guy sucks. We can't do that.
Craziness. I'm not seeing a lot of questions coming into premium Slack right now. Not really seeing a ton of questions coming into YouTube chat either. Friend of the program, a guy that I haven't done a show with in what feels like forever, Jake Hari, unavoidable, my highest owned DK hitter. Oh, man, the good old days.
I remember being a chalk donkey. Oh, yeah, that's right. Have fun, Jake Hari, holding hands with 20% of the field. Enjoy it. Go back to the NHL streets where you belong. Go win somebody else's money. How about that?
We got 3.5 minutes to go.
Incoming.
Anything else you're seeing in crunches or anything you've looked at that's popped up differently?
I will let you know here right now. So as I said, I was going to get to a lot of Kyle Tucker. I did not lie, 22%. So there's a gigantic stand on this slate. Got to a little bit more Alex Wood than I was expecting over on FanDuel. I think that does make a little bit of sense. We didn't talk about him, but Arizona, another team we should be targeting here. Just kind of a different little build that you're getting with him there. Not super necessary, but 8.6K. I didn't mind getting to a little bit more of him. And I feel like we didn't even bring that up earlier. This Arizona team is just abysmal and specifically going to be abysmal against lefties going forward. Yeah. So I think it's a good spot for him specifically. I think he has an opportunity to just give you a little bit of a different look on FanDuel. So I'm happy to get to that as well. Getting to a lot of that Tommy Edman, Nolan Arenado, Paul Goldschmidt trio as well. Harrison Bader as well is popping up for me quite a bit. Getting to those Giants as well. I was not lying. Brandon Belt and Brandon Crawford definitely standing out for me. And then let's see, I'm under the field on Jake Odorizzi. I'm way under the field on Gilbert. Pretty much everything that we said. So I feel good that if I win with anything today, it's not going to be because I did something different than what I told people.
We had a question from Angela Campbell that said, "Is Ashby a lock?" No, not a lock, but at 4,400. Can't kill you, can save you big time. And if the ownership is to be believed, I think he is the most under-owned player on this entire slate.
Ashby?
Yes,
absolutely. On DK, if this were a regular day where I did the deeper dive and then was able to just build lineups, I would be playing a ton on DK and I would have I would have probably a scary amount, like 40-50% of him, because I think he's that good of a GPP play. I think he's that good of a leverage play. And again, you get access to stacks that nobody else can play. So you're not just getting a pitcher who I think is very, very capable of racking up strikeouts at the big league level. You're getting access to teams that other people just cannot fit, to batters, those outfielders that we listed off that are over 5,500, the Bryce Harpers of the world, getting to Franmil Reyes at 5,700, Starling Marte, who's just doing everything well for Oakland. I just think that that's the kind of dude, or that's the kind of situation where a pitcher at 4,400 who's that competent, hard for me not to love it.
I could have said it better myself. I'm with you. I'm a little nervous about the weather, but I'm willing to take my chances.
Yep. Yeah, I'm going to just move on with my day if that doesn't work out. And that's the nice thing about doing this. If you just pick one site that you're just a little bit heavier on, oh crap, hold up. Why do I have 4,700 left over in that lineup? What just happened? Holy shit, we're 1 minute before lock. Okay, well, that's just not going to change then. That's going to be exciting. I have like 4 lineups, boom, 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 all with Erod, because I was forcing in some extra Erod. I didn't know that it was going to basically 1-for-1 swap Erod with Max Scherzer in another spot. It's like, I'm just looking at this. It's like, all right, well, doesn't really change anything. Salary is just a construct, right? If Erod puts up 60, it doesn't matter.
Look, in baseball, that's sort of okay. I mean, it might not be the most opportune scenario for you, but you can it can be an optimal lineup at that number without any sort of effort. Baseball's weird like that, but we're locked, so it doesn't really matter unless you can still make that change, which it doesn't seem like you can. Either way, Eric, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
I had a blast. Let's go back to the Revolutionary War. Let's live our lives. Bring in AC. Yeah,
there it is. That's just perfect. We're going to the Revolutionary War. We're bringing air conditioning. We're bringing machine guns. Good luck tonight, everybody. Win some money. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. This has been Live Before Lock on the Awesemo.com YouTube channel. Peace.